Good evening everyone, and welcome back to Background Historian once again. Thank you for tuning into another episode. Tonight we will be exploring one of the three monotheistic religions in the world today. Islam is the second most followed religion worldwide, and we will be diving deep into its ancient history. Let's begin. Part 1, The World Before Islam, Arabia in the 6th century, Tribal Life, and Spiritual Traditions. Picture, for a moment, a vast, sun-scorched land. The sky above is a pale, endless dome, the kind that turns from soft dawn light into an unyielding midday blaze without much warning. Beneath it stretches a land of contrasts, great seas of sand that seem to ripple like waves, broken only by rocky escarpments, fertile oases, and the winding caravan routes that thread their way from one point of life to the next. It is the 6th century of the Common Era, and the Arabian Peninsula stands at the crossroads of worlds. To the north lie the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, locked in a cycle of rivalry and war. To the south lies the ancient kingdom of Yemen, home to incense traders and maritime routes that reach across the Indian Ocean. Arabia is not isolated, it is a thoroughfare, a bridge for merchants and pilgrims, for soldiers and storytellers. Yet it is also a world unto itself, ruled less by kings and more by clans, guided by customs passed down through generations. The geography that shapes life. Arabia's geography dictates everything. In the western Hijaz region, narrow strips of fertile land cling to the coast of the Red Sea. Here, cities like Mecca and Yathrib, later to be called Medina, rise from the trade that passes through. Further inland, the mountains give way to deserts, the Nefud in the north, the empty quarter in the south. These arid expanses are forbidding, but to the Bedouin tribes that roam them, they are home. Water is life. Oases are not just places to rest. They are the beating hearts of trade and survival. In the north, Dumat al-Jandal thrives as a market town, its wells deep and dependable. In the south, the great walled city of Marib stands as a reminder of older civilizations, its famous dam controlling the seasonal rains. Between these points, camel caravans move like small floating fleets over an ocean of sand, their bells jingling softly in the dry air. Tribal society. Life in Arabia revolves around the tribe, a web of kinship and loyalty that provides both protection and identity. A man belongs to his clan, and his clan belongs to a larger tribal confederation. Honor is the glue that holds it together, and dishonor can ripple through generations. The tribe's leader, or sheikh, is chosen not by inheritance alone but by wisdom, generosity, and the ability to maintain alliances. Strength in battle matters, but so does the ability to mediate disputes and provide for the needy. Hospitality is a sacred duty. A traveler, even if a stranger, is offered water, shade, and bread before his purpose is questioned. In a land where survival often depends on the kindness of others, such generosity is not merely politeness, it is a moral obligation. The Code of Honor. The Arabs of this time live by a code known as Miruwa, a complex of virtues that includes courage, loyalty, generosity, and the defense of one's kin. Poetry, the most valued art form, serves as the record of these virtues. A skilled poet can immortalize a tribe's bravery in battle or humiliate a rival with cutting verses. In this way, poetry is both history and weapon. Raiding, or ghazwa, is part of life. Tribes may launch swift raids on each other's herds, not necessarily to destroy, but to assert strength and test rivals. The art lies in taking wealth without provoking a cycle of revenge that cannot be controlled. Trade and Mecca's place in it. By the 6th century, Arabia has become an essential link in global trade. Goods from India, Persia, and Africa flow north toward the Mediterranean, and Arabian traders grow wealthy by acting as middlemen. Mecca, though not rich in agriculture, occupies a strategic location along caravan routes. It is also home to the Kaaba, a cube-shaped sanctuary that draws pilgrims from across the peninsula. Long before Islam, the Kaaba houses a collection of idols representing tribal deities. Around it, markets bustle during pilgrimage seasons, with traders selling spices, textiles, incense, and leather goods. The Quraysh tribe, custodians of the Kaaba, benefit enormously from both trade and religion. Their status as keepers of the sacred sanctuary ensures a degree of neutrality. Rival tribes often agree to suspend hostilities within Mecca's sacred precincts. Religion before Islam. The spiritual life of pre-Islamic Arabia is a mosaic. Most people are polytheists, worshipping a pantheon of gods and spirits linked to natural forces. Each tribe has its own protective deity, represented by idols kept in the Kaaba or in local shrines. The god Hubal is among the most prominent in Mecca, alongside other figures like Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manet, revered as powerful goddesses. There are also traces of monotheism. Some Arabs follow Christianity, especially in the northern and southern fringes where Byzantine and Ethiopian influence is strong. Others follow Judaism, particularly in oasis towns like Yathrib. Still others, known as Hanifs, reject idolatry entirely, seeking a pure faith in one God without formally aligning with any organized religion. The Hanifs and the search for purity. The Hanifs are few in number, but they represent a quiet undercurrent of spiritual restlessness. They spend time in solitude, contemplating creation, praying, and fasting. In an age where most religion is bound up with tribal identity, the Hanifs' quest for a universal truth sets them apart. Among them are men like Zayd ibn Amr, who openly criticize idol worship and refuse to partake in sacrifices to pagan gods. Social structure and inequality. Arabian society is deeply stratified. Tribal nobility hold wealth and prestige, while freedmen, clients, and slaves occupy lower rungs. Slavery exists, fed by war, debt, and trade. While some slaves rise to positions of trust, others endure hard labor or serve as concubines. Women's roles vary. Some are respected businesswomen and poets, but many are denied rights, and practices like female infanticide persist in certain regions. Yet within this system, there are examples of women who wield significant influence. Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a wealthy merchant, will later become the wife of the Prophet Muhammad. In the cultural sphere, women's poetry and songs keep history alive, especially in recounting battles and elegies for the fallen. Conflict and fragile peace. Though tribes compete fiercely, they also understand the need for truces and alliances. Certain months are declared sacred, during which fighting is forbidden. These sacred months allow trade fairs and pilgrimages to take place safely. Disrupting them is seen as an offense not only against other tribes but against the divine order. One famous example of pre-Islamic alliance building is the Hilf al-Feudal, or Alliance of the Virtuous, formed in Mecca by several clans to protect the rights of traders and travelers. This pact, made in the house of Abdullah ibn Judin, will later be remembered fondly by Muhammad himself. The spiritual climate before revelation. The 6th century is a time of transition. The great empires to the north and east are engaged in exhausting wars. Trade routes are shifting, and in Arabia, the old tribal order feels both deeply entrenched and subtly unstable. Many Arabs continue their ancestral worship without question, but beneath the surface, there is a growing awareness of moral decay, of corruption among leaders, of injustice toward the weak, and of a lack of unity among the people. In this setting, the figure of Muhammad ibn Abdullah will soon emerge. Born into the Quraysh tribe, orphaned at a young age, he will grow up with an intimate understanding of both privilege and hardship. His early life will be shaped by the currents of trade, the bonds of kinship, and the quiet, searching spirit that leads some men into the solitude of the desert. A land waiting for change. The Arabia of the 6th century is a land of contradictions, fiercely proud yet often divided, rich in culture yet plagued by injustice, deeply tied to tradition yet unknowingly on the brink of transformation. In the stillness of its deserts and the clamor of its marketplaces, the stage is set for a message that will transcend tribe and territory, speaking to the hearts of men and women across centuries. For now, the caravans continue their journeys under the stars, the poets sing of tribal glory, and the Kaaba's idols stand undisturbed within their sanctuary walls. But change is coming, carried not by the sword of a conqueror nor the laws of an empire, but by the quiet words spoken to a single man in the stillness of a cave. Part 2, The Birth of Prophet Muhammad, Early Life, Family, and the Pre-Islamic World. The year is believed to be 570 CE, a year the Arabs will remember as Am al-Fil, the Year of the Elephant. It is named after an event that will be recounted in hushed, awe-filled voices for decades, the attempted invasion of Mecca by a foreign army led by the Abyssinian governor, Abraha, who came riding with war elephants to destroy the Kaaba. Yet the army never reached its goal. Tradition holds that a strange and sudden disaster struck them, a swarm of birds dropping stones, a calamity so sudden that the people of Mecca saw it as a sign of divine protection over their sacred sanctuary. It is in this very year, in the city of Mecca, that Muhammad ibn Abdullah is born. A family rooted in the Quraysh. Muhammad's family belongs to the Banu Hashim clan, one of the respected branches of the Quraysh tribe. The Quraysh are custodians of the Kaaba and influential in both politics and trade. Muhammad's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, is among Mecca's most prominent leaders. He commands respect for his wisdom, his generosity, and his role in managing the sacred well of Zamzam, a water source believed to be a gift from God to Hagar and her son Ishmael. Muhammad's father, Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, is a young man of dignity and good reputation. Yet, even before Muhammad draws his first breath, tragedy strikes. Abdullah falls ill while away on a trading journey and dies, leaving his wife, Amina bint Wahb, a widow. Muhammad enters the world as an orphan of the father. His mother Amina, though grief-stricken, is determined to give her son the love and care he will need in a world that often measures a man by the strength of his family ties. The night of his birth. Stories told in later years will surround Muhammad's birth with a sense of wonder. It is said that on that night, a light shone from Amina that reached as far as the palaces of Syria. Others will claim that the sacred fire of the Persians, which had burned for 1,000 years, extinguished itself that night, and that distant kings and priests felt an unexplainable tremor in their hearts. Whether taken as literal events or as symbolic signs, these stories will form part of the tapestry of reverence woven around Muhammad's life. But in the quiet streets of Mecca, his arrival is a simple human moment. A newborn's first cry carried through the still air, a mother holding her child close. Raised among the desert tribes. According to custom in Mecca, children are often sent to live for a time with Bedouin families in the desert. The reasons are both practical and cultural. The desert air is considered healthier, the life more rugged, and the language purer. Muhammad is placed under the care of a woman named Halima al-Sa'diyya from the tribe of Banu Sa'd. Halima will later tell of the blessings that seemed to accompany the boy from the moment she took him in. Her once weak and slow-moving camel suddenly becomes strong, her herd begins to thrive, and her home seems filled with a newfound contentment. Whether miracle or coincidence, Muhammad grows in her care into a strong, bright-eyed child. He learns the ways of the desert, the rhythms of sunrise and sunset, the shapes of clouds that promise rare rain, the meaning of the wind's shifting voice. He drinks in the stars at night, the constellations that the Bedouin used to guide their caravans. And in the open sky and unbroken horizons, he comes to know solitude, a companion that will stay with him throughout his life. Loss comes early. When Muhammad is about 6 years old, another shadow falls over his life. His mother Amina takes him on a journey to Yathrib, the city that will one day be called Medina, to visit her relatives and the grave of his father. On their way back to Mecca, Amina falls gravely ill. Somewhere along the dusty road, in the small village of Abwa, she dies, leaving Muhammad an orphan of both father and mother. He is brought back to Mecca in the care of a servant named Ayman and placed under the guardianship of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. The old man, though advanced in years, loves the boy deeply, treating him with the tenderness of one who sees greatness in his grandson's future. But fate is not finished testing the child. Within 2 years, Abdul Muttalib too passes away. Under the care of Abu Talib. At the age of 8, Muhammad comes under the care of his uncle Abu Talib, a respected merchant of the Quraysh and a man of modest means. Abu Talib will play a crucial role in Muhammad's life, providing protection and guidance even when it comes at personal cost. The bond between them will endure until Abu Talib's death decades later. With his uncle, Muhammad learns the ways of caravan trade. He travels north to Syria, experiencing the bustle of distant markets, the languages of foreign merchants, and the scent of goods from faraway lands. He sees the wealth of great cities, the ruins of fallen ones, and the diversity of faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and lingering paganism, that shape the wider world. The young man known for truth. By his teenage years, Muhammad has earned a reputation that sets him apart. In a society where honesty can be scarce in business, he is known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. People leave their valuables with him for safekeeping, confident they will be returned without loss or deceit. His quiet dignity, fairness, and respect for others make him stand out, even among the proud Quraysh. He also develops a reputation for avoiding the excesses common among young men of his age. He stays away from drunkenness, gambling, and the more reckless amusements of Meccan nights. Some will later say that he was protected from these things by a guiding hand, though he himself will speak only of living a life shaped by honesty and restraint. The Syrian caravan and the monk. One of the most famous stories from Muhammad's youth comes from a trading journey to the north, when he is still in his early teens. Traveling with Abu Talib's caravan, he passes through the town of Basra in Syria. There, a Christian monk named Bahira takes notice of the boy. According to tradition, Bahira observes signs in Muhammad, in his demeanor, his features, and perhaps a mark on his back, that convince him the child will one day become a prophet. Whether history or legend, the story adds to the sense that Muhammad's life, even in its quiet beginnings, carries an undercurrent of destiny. The Hilf al-Feudal. In his 20s, Muhammad participates in an alliance that will later be remembered as a rare moment of collective justice in pre-Islamic Arabia. Known as the Hilf al-Feudal, the Alliance of the Virtuous, it is formed when a Yemeni merchant is wronged by a powerful Meccan trader. Several clans come together to pledge that they will defend the rights of the weak against the abuses of the strong, regardless of tribal ties. Muhammad will later recall this alliance with pride, saying that if such a pact were called upon in his time as a prophet, he would answer it. This commitment to justice will become one of the pillars of his later message. Khadija, partner in life and work. By the age of 25, Muhammad is known in Mecca not only for his honesty but also for his skill in trade. His reputation reaches Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a wealthy widow and respected merchant in her own right. She hires him to lead a caravan to Syria, and the journey proves so successful that she earns greater profit than she had anticipated. Impressed by his integrity and capability, Khadija proposes marriage. Muhammad accepts, and their union becomes one of mutual respect and affection. Khadija is 15 years his senior, but their marriage will be a source of profound stability for him. She will be his confidant, his supporter, and the first to believe in his mission when it begins. A life of quiet reflection. Even as he prospers in business and family life, Muhammad feels a growing pull toward solitude and contemplation. Mecca is a city of wealth and pilgrimage, but also of sharp inequality and moral unrest. The idols in the Kaaba attract pilgrims and bring prosperity, yet they also represent a spiritual emptiness for those who, like the Hanifs, seek the worship of a single creator. From time to time, Muhammad retreats to the caves in the hills surrounding Mecca. One such cave, Hira, will become his refuge, a place where he can look out over the desert and lose himself in thought. It is here, away from the noise of the marketplace, that he contemplates life, death, and the Creator of all things. The world he inherits. By the time Muhammad approaches the age of 40, the currents of history are flowing toward a momentous change. The Quraysh, though powerful, are not immune to the discontent of the poor or the rivalries between clans. The wider world is marked by the decline of empires, shifting trade routes, and religious disputes that leave many seeking a more unifying truth. In the silence of the desert nights, Muhammad's thoughts turn increasingly to the mysteries of creation and the moral fabric of society. He is a man who has known loss and love, hardship and respect, and through it all has held fast to honesty and compassion. Soon, in the stillness of the cave at Hira, his life, and the world, will change forever. Part 3, the first revelation, the Cave of Hira, early followers, and persecution in Mecca. The hills outside Mecca are quiet at night. They rise from the earth like ancient sentinels, their shadows stretching far under the pale light of the moon. For those who seek solitude, these mountains offer refuge from the ceaseless noise of the city, from the bargaining voices in the markets, the clinking of coins, and the recitations of poets in the gathering places. Among these hills is Jabal al-Nur, the Mountain of Light. On its rocky flank lies a small, unassuming opening, the Cave of Hira. From inside, one can see Mecca in the distance, a cluster of low buildings around the sacred Kaaba, and beyond it, the vast emptiness of the desert. It is here that Muhammad ibn Abdullah has been coming more often in recent years. At nearly 40 years old, he is a respected merchant, a devoted husband to Khadija, and a man known throughout Mecca for his honesty. Yet something within him yearns for deeper answers. He has watched with quiet concern as greed, corruption, and cruelty grow in the city, the neglect of orphans, the exploitation of the poor, and the blind devotion to idols that cannot speak or act. In the stillness of the cave, Muhammad prays, reflects, and fasts. He contemplates the vastness of creation, the stars scattered like jewels across the night, the wind that moves without being seen, the life-giving water that springs from the earth. He thinks of the Hanifs, those few who reject idolatry and seek the worship of one Creator. And he wonders, in the depths of his heart, what his role might be in such a world. The Night of Destiny. It is during one of these retreats, in the month of Ramadan, that the moment comes, a moment that will divide his life into a before and an after. Muhammad is alone in the cave. The darkness is complete, save for the faint glimmer of starlight from the mouth of the cave. Then, without warning, he senses a presence. It is overwhelming, not merely something seen or heard, but something that fills the air itself, something undeniable and all-encompassing. A voice speaks, commanding, yet unlike any voice he has heard before. Iqra, read. Muhammad, startled and unsure, replies that he cannot read. The voice comes again, insistent, Iqra. Once more, he answers that he cannot read. A third time, the command comes, and with it, words that will mark the beginning of the Quran. Read in the name of your Lord who created men from a clinging clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous. Who taught by the pen? Taught man that which he knew not. The force of the experience is almost too much to bear. Muhammad feels as if the words have been etched into his very being. Trembling, he stumbles out of the cave, his heart pounding, his mind racing. The stillness of the night seems unreal now. The stars distant, the earth solid yet strangely altered by what has just occurred. The return to Khadija. In a state of fear and awe, Muhammad descends the mountain and returns home. When he enters his house, his voice shakes as he calls for Khadija, "Cover me, cover me." She wraps him in a cloak, holding him until his trembling subsides. When he can finally speak, he tells her what happened. He does not know if what he has seen is a divine calling or some strange, terrifying vision. But Khadija listens with unwavering attention. She knows her husband, his honesty, his dignity, his compassion. She reassures him, by God, he will never disgrace you. You uphold the ties of kinship, you speak the truth, you bear the burdens of the weak, you honor the guest, and you help those in need. Determined to understand the meaning of this event, Khadija takes Muhammad to her cousin Waraka ibn Nawfal, an elderly Christian scholar who is well versed in the scriptures. After hearing Muhammad's account, Waraka's eyes fill with recognition. This, Waraka says, is the same Namus, the angel of revelation, who came to Moses. Your people will call you a liar, they will persecute you, and they will drive you from this land. But if I live to see that day, I will stand by you. Muhammad's heart is heavy. He has never sought leadership or conflict, yet it seems that what has begun will change everything. A pause in revelation. After that first overwhelming encounter, there is a period of silence. Days pass, then weeks, without another revelation. For Muhammad, the absence is deeply unsettling. He begins to wonder if he has done something wrong or if he has been abandoned. But one day, as he walks the hills near Mecca, the presence returns, the angel filling the horizon, declaring, "You are the messenger of God." From that moment, the revelations continue, sometimes in words that flow like a gentle stream, other times with a weight so intense that Muhammad feels as though they press upon his very chest. He will later describe the sound of revelation as like the ringing of a bell, clear, powerful, and inescapable. The message begins. The earliest revelations are centered on the oneness of God, a call to turn away from idols and to worship the Creator alone. They speak of moral responsibility, of caring for the orphan and the poor, of honesty in trade and justice in dealings. They remind listeners of the fate of past peoples who ignored divine guidance, and they point toward a day of judgment when every soul will be held accountable. At first, Muhammad shares these words only with those closest to him. Khadija becomes the first to believe in his mission, her faith steady and unshaken. Then comes his young cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, still a boy but fiercely loyal. Zayd ibn Haritha, Muhammad's adopted son, also accepts the message without hesitation. Among the early believers is Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, a trusted friend and respected merchant, whose influence will bring others into the fold. The quiet years. For 3 years, the call to Islam remains private. The believers gather quietly, often in the house of Al-Arqam, away from the eyes of the Quraysh leaders. Here they learn the words of the new revelation, pray together, and strengthen their faith. During this time, the small community grows slowly but steadily. They are bound not by tribe but by a shared belief in one God and a commitment to the moral principles Muhammad teaches. This unity across social boundaries, embracing slaves, freedmen, and nobles alike, is something entirely new in Meccan society. The call goes public. Eventually, the command comes to proclaim the message openly. Muhammad begins by calling his own clan together, inviting them to worship one God and to leave behind their idols. Some listen with curiosity, others with ridicule, and a few with anger. His uncle Abu Talib protects him out of family loyalty, even though he does not accept the new faith. But another uncle, Abu Lahab, becomes one of his fiercest opponents, publicly mocking and insulting him. Muhammad then takes his call to the wider Quraysh. Standing on the hill of Safa, he addresses the people of Mecca, warning them of the coming judgment and urging them to turn to the worship of God. The reaction is mixed, some dismiss him as a dreamer, others accuse him of trying to disrupt the city's unity and its profitable pilgrimage trade. Persecution begins. As more people accept Islam, the hostility of the Quraysh intensifies. The new faith challenges their authority, their wealth, and the traditions tied to the Kaaba's idols. They begin to harass the believers, targeting the most vulnerable first. Slaves who embrace Islam are subjected to brutal punishment. Bilal ibn Rabah, an Abyssinian slave, is tortured by his master, who lays him on the burning sand and places a heavy stone on his chest. Yet Bilal endures, repeating only, Ahad, Ahad, one, a testament to the oneness of God. His suffering will become a symbol of steadfast faith. Others are beaten, mocked, or socially ostracized. Families turn against their own members. Trade with the Muslims is discouraged, and rumors are spread to discredit Muhammad. The Quraysh's attempts to stop him. The leaders of the Quraysh try various tactics to silence Muhammad. They offer him wealth, power, and marriage to the most beautiful women in Mecca, on the condition that he abandon his message. But his reply is firm. If they place the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not leave this matter until God makes it prevail or I die in the attempt. When persuasion fails, they turn to threats. Yet Muhammad continues to speak, reciting the revelations as they come. His words, carried on the wind through the streets and markets, begin to touch even those who come only to mock. A movement gaining strength. Despite the persecution, the Muslim community continues to grow. The Quran's eloquence captivates listeners, its calls for justice and compassion resonate with those weary of Mecca's inequalities. The early believers are united not by tribal blood but by a shared vision of a society founded on faith, morality, and accountability before God. In these early years, the foundation of Islam is laid, not in grand armies or political power, but in the hearts of men and women willing to face ridicule, hardship, and danger for the sake of truth. The turning point ahead. The persecution will grow harsher in the years to come, pushing the Muslims toward new strategies, including seeking refuge in distant lands and eventually leaving Mecca altogether. But for now, the words that began in the stillness of the cave of Hira continue to spread, quietly but persistently, like water finding its way through rock. And above all, Muhammad remains steadfast, a man who did not seek leadership, yet has been entrusted with a message that will change the world. Part 4, The Migration to Medina, Hijra, the First Islamic State, and Building the Muslim Community. The years in Mecca have been long and heavy for the early Muslims. The private, hopeful days in Al-Arkam's house now feel like a distant memory. Persecution has grown harsher. Ridicule has turned to public humiliation, and public humiliation has turned to physical violence. Some believers have been beaten in the streets. Others have been starved under social boycotts. Families have been torn apart by tribal divisions. The message that began with the gentle command to read has been met with the clenched fists and hard eyes of those who see it as a threat to their power. Yet the Quranic verses continue to flow, verses of patience, of resilience, of trust in God's plan. And Muhammad, their prophet, remains a steadfast figure in the center of this storm. A ray of hope from Yathrib. Far to the north of Mecca lies a city then known as Yathrib, a fertile oasis surrounded by palm groves, lying along important trade routes. Unlike Mecca, Yathrib is not dominated by a single tribe. Instead, it is home to a mix of Arab tribes, primarily the Aws and the Khazraj, and several Jewish communities, each with their own alliances and rivalries. For years, Yathrib's Arab tribes have been locked in cycles of feuds and battles, the most recent and bloody being the Battle of Buwaydih. These conflicts have left the city weary of division and in search of a unifying leader who could mediate between its factions. News of Muhammad's message, his call to one God, to justice, and to the fair treatment of all people, reaches Yathrib through travelers and pilgrims who visit Mecca during the pilgrimage seasons. Some among the Khazraj listen with curiosity. They recognize that his teachings carry not just a spiritual call, but also the potential to heal the divisions that have plagued their city. The first pledges. During the pilgrimage season in the 11th year after the first revelation, a small group from Yathrib meets Muhammad secretly. They hear his recitation of the Quran, and something stirs in them, a mixture of awe and recognition. They accept Islam and pledge not to worship anything but God, to speak the truth, and to live moral lives. The following year, they return with more companions. This time, 12 men pledge themselves to the faith and to Muhammad's leadership in spiritual matters. This is known as the First Pledge of Aqaba. Muhammad sends one of his close companions, Musab ibn Umair, back with them to teach the Quran and spread the message in Yathrib. Musab's efforts bear fruit quickly. Families and clans across the city hear the new message. Islam begins to take root not as an isolated faith, but as a community, men and women from different backgrounds gathering together to pray, to learn, and to support one another. The Second Pledge of Aqaba. The real turning point comes the following year, during the pilgrimage season, when over 70 people from Yathrib come to secretly meet Muhammad at night, on the slopes of Aqaba outside Mecca. This meeting is tense, not because of division among those gathered, but because of the risk. If the Quraysh were to discover that people from outside Mecca were pledging allegiance to Muhammad in political as well as spiritual matters, the retaliation could be swift and deadly. Under the cover of darkness, they pledge their protection to Muhammad. They promise that if he comes to Yathrib, they will defend him as they would defend their own families. This is the Second Pledge of Aqaba, and it marks the shift from Muhammad's role as a spiritual guide to also being a political leader. The Quraysh's alarm. When the Quraysh hear of this pledge, their alarm turns to fury. Until now, they have seen Muhammad's message as a local problem, a source of friction within Mecca. But now it has the potential to spread beyond their control. Worse still, Yathrib is located along trade routes they rely on. If Muhammad gains influence there, it could threaten their economic power. The persecution in Mecca grows harsher. Muhammad's followers are beaten more openly, and threats to his life become more serious. The command to migrate. Then comes the command, not from political calculation, but from revelation. The believers are to leave Mecca and go to Yathrib. This migration, known as the Hijra, is more than just a change of location. It is the beginning of a new chapter in Islamic history. Years later, the Hijra will mark the starting point of the Islamic calendar, the moment when Islam transitions from a small, persecuted group into a united, functioning community. The migration happens quietly, in small groups, so as not to alert the Quraysh. Families leave behind their homes, possessions, and even loved ones. Some slip away at night. Others pretend to be leaving for trade. The journey of over 200 miles through desert terrain is not without risk, but in Yathrib, the Ansar, the helpers, as the city's Muslim residents will come to be known, are waiting to welcome them. The plot to kill Muhammad. The Quraysh cannot ignore Muhammad himself. They decide that the only way to stop his influence is to eliminate him entirely. Leaders from various clans agree to a plan. One young man from each tribe will strike him at the same time, ensuring that the responsibility for his death is shared and no single clan can be blamed. But that night, as the assassins surround his home, Muhammad has already been warned by revelation. He asks his cousin Ali to sleep in his bed under his blanket, while he slips away under the cover of darkness. Alongside his closest companion, Abu Bakr, Muhammad takes a route south, away from Yathrib, to throw off the pursuers. They hide in the cave of Thor for 3 days, while Quraysh search parties comb the area. According to tradition, a spider spins a web across the cave's entrance and a pigeon nests nearby, making it seem as though the cave has been undisturbed for a long time. When the search passes, Muhammad and Abu Bakr resume their journey north. The arrival in Yathrib. When Muhammad finally enters Yathrib, the welcome is jubilant. Crowds gather, lining the streets, reciting poetry in his honor. The people invite him to stay in their homes, but he declines to choose among them. Instead, he allows his camel to walk freely, saying that it will stop where God wills. The camel kneels in an open plot of land belonging to 2 orphans. This is where Muhammad will build the Masjid al-Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque, which will serve as the center of the new community. From this moment, Yathrib becomes known as Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina, building the first Islamic state. In Medina, Muhammad is no longer just a preacher. He is a statesman, a judge, a military leader, and a unifying figure for a community of diverse backgrounds. One of his first actions is to establish bonds of brotherhood between the Muhajirin, the emigrants from Mecca, and the Ansar, the helpers from Medina. These bonds go beyond formal alliances, they are personal, with each emigrant paired with a local, sharing resources and responsibilities as though they were family. He also drafts what will become known as the Constitution of Medina, a formal agreement outlining the rights and duties of all residents, including Muslims, Jews, and others. It establishes Medina as a single community, united in mutual defense, with freedom of religion respected for all groups. This document is remarkable for its time, a structured, written agreement that recognizes diversity while affirming unity. Challenges from within and without. The move to Medina is a turning point, but it is not the end of hardship. Some of Medina's residents, while outwardly accepting Muhammad's leadership, secretly oppose him. These hypocrites, led by a man named Abdullah ibn Ubay, resent the influence Muhammad has gained. Outside the city, the Quraysh continue to see Muhammad as a threat. Trade routes that pass near Medina are now under potential Muslim influence. Tensions rise, leading to the first armed confrontations, skirmishes that will eventually escalate into major battles. A community rooted in faith. Despite these challenges, the Muslim community thrives in Medina. Prayer becomes a public, communal act, called by the voice of the adhan, the call to prayer, which begins after a companion named Abdullah ibn Zayd dreams of the words and shares them with Muhammad. The mosque is not only a place of worship but also a meeting place, a court, and a shelter for the poor. Social justice becomes an active principle. The wealthy are encouraged, and eventually required, to give a portion of their wealth in zakat to help those in need. Solidarity is not just spoken about, it is lived. The Hijra's lasting legacy. The migration to Medina is more than a physical relocation. It is a transformation in identity. The Muslims are no longer a scattered group hiding in the shadows, they are a community with a home, a system of governance, and a shared destiny. The Hijra teaches them that faith sometimes demands sacrifice, that trust in God often requires action, and that unity can turn vulnerability into strength. From the humble plots of land where date palms grow to the bustling markets, Medina now hums with a new energy, the energy of a people who believe they are part of something greater than themselves. But even as the community grows, clouds gather on the horizon. The Quraysh will not accept this new order without a fight, and soon the valleys around Medina will echo with the sound of battle. Part 5, The Battles of Early Islam, Badr, Uhud, and the Confederates. The migration to Medina had brought safety, but not peace. The Quraysh of Mecca had not forgotten Muhammad's defiance, nor forgiven the loss of many of their people to his cause. The Hijra had shifted the balance of power in the region, and the Quraysh feared what would happen if this new community in Medina grew unchecked. The Muslims, meanwhile, knew they were not beyond danger. They had escaped persecution, but their former city still lay along their most vital trade routes. Many of the emigrants had left behind homes, land, and wealth in Mecca, possessions now in the hands of those who had once been their neighbors. In these tense early years, the path toward open conflict began to take shape. The pressure from Mecca. For the Quraysh, their lifeline was trade. Twice a year, caravans would journey north to Syria and south to Yemen, carrying goods, leather, spices, cloth, that kept Mecca prosperous. These caravans passed close to Medina, within reach of the Muslims. It was not long before Muhammad began intercepting them. These were not large-scale raids of destruction, but calculated strikes meant to weaken Mecca's economy and recover wealth taken from the Muslims. They also served as a political message. The Quraysh could no longer move unchallenged. The Quraysh saw these actions as a direct threat. Each interception was a spark, and sparks, in a dry climate, do not take long to start a fire. The road to Badr. The decisive moment came in the second year after the Hijra. A caravan led by Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, one of the Quraysh's most skilled leaders, was returning from Syria. Laden with valuable goods, it was guarded, but still vulnerable. Muhammad saw an opportunity. He called for his companions to prepare to intercept the caravan. About 300 men answered, not professional soldiers, but farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and shepherds. They had only a few horses and camels, and their weapons were basic: swords, spears, and bows. This was not an army in the formal sense, but a community defending itself. Abu Sufyan, cautious and shrewd, learned of the Muslim plan and sent word to Mecca for reinforcements. The Quraysh responded with force, an army of around 1,000 men, heavily armed, including many of Mecca's most prominent warriors. The Valley of Badr. The two forces converged near the wells of Badr, a valley about 80 miles southwest of Medina. The Muslims reached the area first, securing the wells to control the water supply, a crucial advantage in desert warfare. The Quraysh arrived soon after. Their army outnumbered the Muslims more than 3 to 1, and by worldly standards, victory for Medina seemed impossible. On the eve of battle, Muhammad spent the night in prayer, asking God for victory and for the survival of the believers. His companions, though anxious, were resolved. They knew that this was not merely a fight for land or wealth, it was a struggle for the survival of their faith. The battle unfolds. The battle began with the traditional Arab custom of mubaraza, single combat between champions from each side. The Quraysh sent forth Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, his brother Shayba, and his son al-Walid. The Muslims answered with Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle, a fierce warrior, along with Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ubaidah ibn al-Harith. In a swift and brutal exchange, the Muslim champions prevailed, striking a blow to the Quraysh's morale. Then the armies clashed. Dust filled the air, swords rang against shields, and cries echoed across the valley. Despite their smaller numbers, the Muslims fought with determination. The Quran later described how the believers were aided by angels, unseen but present, giving them courage. By the end of the day, the Quraysh were in full retreat. 70 of their men had been killed, including some of their most influential leaders. 70 more were taken prisoner. The Muslims had lost only 14. The aftermath of Badr. The victory at Badr sent shockwaves through Arabia. For the Muslims, it was a sign that God's support was with them. For the Quraysh, it was a humiliation, their prestige and reputation wounded before the entire region. But victory brought new challenges. Prisoners of war had to be dealt with. Some were ransomed, others released in exchange for teaching literacy to Muslim children. This set a precedent for treating captives with a degree of mercy rare in the warfare of the time. Still, everyone knew that the Quraysh would not forget Badr. They would regroup, rebuild, and return. The road to Uhud. 1 year later, the Quraysh were ready for revenge. Led again by Abu Sufyan, they assembled an army of around 3,000 men, including 200 cavalry and a caravan of supplies. Their goal: march on Medina, crush Muhammad's community, and erase the humiliation of Badr. The Muslims, numbering around 700, debated how to respond. Some favored staying in Medina and fighting defensively in the narrow streets. Others, especially younger companions eager to prove themselves, wanted to meet the Quraysh outside the city. Muhammad agreed to the latter, and the army set out to meet the enemy near Mount Uhud, just north of Medina. The Battle of Uhud. At dawn, the Muslims took up a strategic position with the mountain at their back. Muhammad placed 50 archers on a small hill to guard the rear flank, ordering them not to leave their post under any circumstances. At first, the battle went well. The Quraysh lines faltered, and the Muslims began to push them back. But in the midst of victory, discipline broke. Seeing the Quraysh camp seemingly abandoned, many of the archers left their position to gather spoils, despite Muhammad's orders. This opened a gap. Khalid ibn al-Walid, a skilled Quraysh cavalry commander who would later become a Muslim, saw the opportunity and led a charge through the unguarded flank. The tide of battle turned swiftly. The Muslims were caught between two forces, and chaos erupted. In the confusion, Muhammad was struck, his helmet driven into his cheek, wounding him. Word spread that he had been killed, and panic set in among some of the fighters. But he was alive, rallying those around him to retreat up the slopes of Uhud. The aftermath of Uhud. The Quraysh did not press their advantage to destroy Medina, but the losses were heavy. Around 70 Muslims were killed, including Hamza, whose body was mutilated by the Quraysh in revenge. The grief in Medina was deep and bitter. Uhud was a sobering lesson. It reminded the Muslims that victory was not guaranteed by numbers or past success, discipline and obedience were essential, and even the best warriors could falter if pride overtook caution. The Battle of the Confederates. 2 years later, the Quraysh made their most ambitious move yet. They forged alliances with other tribes, including the powerful Ghatafan, and with some Jewish tribes hostile to Muhammad. In all, an army of around 10,000 men marched toward Medina. This coalition became known as Al-Ahzab, the Confederates. The Muslims, numbering only about 3,000, knew they could not face such a force in open battle. A companion named Salman the Persian suggested a strategy unfamiliar to Arabian warfare, digging a trench around the exposed parts of the city to prevent cavalry charges. The work was grueling. The Muslims labored in the cold wind, hungry and tired, but united in purpose. When the Confederates arrived, they found their advance blocked by the deep trench. For weeks, they laid siege to the city, but the trench held, and Medina's defenders remained vigilant. Inside the city, tensions rose when a tribe within Medina, the Banu Qurayza, broke their pact with Muhammad and conspired with the enemy. This betrayal added to the pressure, but the siege dragged on without a breakthrough. Harsh weather, dwindling supplies, and growing mistrust among the Confederates' allies began to take their toll. Finally, a storm swept through the camp, scattering tents and extinguishing fires. Disheartened, the Confederates withdrew. The siege had failed without a full-scale battle. A new balance of power. The failure of the Confederates marked a turning point. The Quraysh had thrown their greatest effort into destroying Medina and had failed. From this point forward, the balance of power began to shift in Muhammad's favor. Badr had shown that the Muslims could win against the odds. Uhud had taught them the cost of disobedience. The Battle of the Trench had proven that with unity, strategy, and patience, even the largest threat could be withstood. But the conflicts were far from over. The Quraysh still controlled the Kaaba, and the Muslims still longed to make pilgrimage there. That longing would lead to one of the most surprising and strategic events in Muhammad's life, not a battle, but a treaty. Part 6, Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Conquest of Mecca, and the Prophet's Final Sermon. The years after the Battle of the Confederates were marked by a new confidence in the Muslim community of Medina. The Quraysh had failed in their most ambitious attempt to destroy the Muslims, and their prestige in Arabia had been shaken. But even as the balance of power shifted, one truth weighed heavily on the hearts of the Muslims: they had still not performed the pilgrimage to the Kaaba. For generations, the Kaaba had been the center of Arabian worship. Even before Islam, tribes from across the peninsula had made the journey to Mecca, circling the sacred sanctuary and performing rituals believed to connect them with the divine. For Muhammad and his followers, now devoted to the worship of the one God, the desire to visit the Kaaba was not about idol veneration, it was about reclaiming a house dedicated to God since the time of Abraham and Ishmael. The decision to set out. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, Muhammad announced his intention: they would make the pilgrimage to Mecca, peacefully, without weapons for battle. This was a bold move. The Quraysh still viewed Muhammad as their rival and enemy, and there was no guarantee they would allow such a journey. But the pilgrimage season was traditionally a time of truce among the tribes, and Muhammad intended to honor that custom. Around 1,400 Muslims set out from Medina, dressed in the simple white garments of ihram, the clothing of pilgrims, and carrying only light arms for self-defense. They brought animals for sacrifice, a clear sign that their mission was one of worship, not war. The standoff at Hudaybiyah. When news of the Muslims' approach reached Mecca, the Quraysh mobilized. They sent cavalry to block the main road and prevent Muhammad from entering. Muhammad diverted the caravan onto a less traveled route, eventually stopping at a place called Hudaybiyah, just outside the sacred boundary of Mecca. Here, the two sides entered tense negotiations. The Quraysh wanted to avoid outright battle, but they were unwilling to let Muhammad enter the city that year. Days of back-and-forth discussions followed, with messengers passing between the camps. Tempers ran high. At one point, rumors spread that one of Muhammad's envoys had been killed, nearly triggering armed conflict. Finally, a treaty was drafted, one that, on the surface, seemed to heavily favor the Quraysh. The terms of the treaty. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah contained several key points. The Muslims would return to Medina without performing the pilgrimage that year. They would be allowed to return the following year for a 3-day pilgrimage. A 10-year truce would be established between the Quraysh and the Muslims. Any tribe could ally with either side, and the alliance would be respected. If a Quraysh tribesman came to Medina without the permission of his guardian, the Muslims must return him. But if a Muslim came to Mecca, the Quraysh would not return him. For many of Muhammad's companions, the terms felt humiliating. They had journeyed with hope and faith, only to be turned back. Even Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of Muhammad's closest companions, struggled to accept the agreement. But Muhammad saw further than the moment. The treaty was not a defeat, it was a victory of a different kind. Why the treaty was strategic. The 10-year truce gave the Muslims a priceless advantage: security. For the first time, they could spread Islam across Arabia without fear of immediate Quraysh retaliation. It also gave them recognition as an equal political power. The Quraysh had signed a formal agreement with them, acknowledging their legitimacy. And in the months following the treaty, the effects were clear. Without constant war, the message of Islam spread rapidly. Tribes who had been cautious now approached Medina openly, and the number of converts grew faster than ever. The breaking of the treaty. The peace held for nearly 2 years, until a Quraysh-allied tribe attacked a Muslim-allied tribe, killing several people. This was a clear violation of the treaty. When word reached Medina, Muhammad acted swiftly. He gathered an army far larger than any the Quraysh had faced before, around 10,000 men, and marched toward Mecca. The conquest of Mecca. The Muslims entered Mecca with almost no bloodshed. Most of the Quraysh surrendered without resistance, their will to fight broken by the overwhelming show of force. Muhammad's entry into the city was not that of a vengeful conqueror. He rode with his head bowed in humility, reciting words of praise to God. When he reached the Kaaba, he ordered the idols to be removed and destroyed, declaring the sanctuary restored to the pure worship of God. In a remarkable act of mercy, he announced a general amnesty. "Go, for you are free." Those who had persecuted him, driven him from his home, and fought against him for years were pardoned. Many who had once been his fiercest enemies now embraced Islam. The farewell pilgrimage. 2 years later, in the 10th year after the Hijrah, Muhammad performed what would be his first and only full pilgrimage as a Muslim leader. This journey became known as the farewell pilgrimage. Tens of thousands joined him, coming from across Arabia. As they gathered at Mount Arafat, Muhammad addressed the crowd in what would become his final sermon. The Prophet's final sermon. His words were clear and solemn, carrying the weight of a life's mission nearing its end. He reminded the people that their lives, property, and honor were sacred as the day and place in which they stood. He abolished all forms of interest, usury, and tribal vengeance. He urged men to treat women with kindness and fairness. He declared that all humans were equal, no Arab superior to a non-Arab, no white to a black, except by piety and good deeds. He emphasized the unity of the Muslim community and the importance of holding fast to the Quran and his example. Then he looked to the gathered thousands and asked, "Have I conveyed the message?" When they answered, "Yes," he raised his finger to the sky and said, "O God, bear witness. The end approaches." Not long after returning to Medina, Muhammad fell ill. His strength waned over the course of several days. On his final morning, he stepped into the mosque to see the Muslims praying in rows. A faint smile crossed his face, the community was united, worshipping God together. Later that day, in the company of his wife Aisha, he whispered his final words. To the highest companion. He was buried in the chamber of Aisha, beside the mosque, a place where to this day, millions come to send prayers of peace upon him. The lasting impact. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah showed the power of patience and strategic foresight. The conquest of Mecca demonstrated mercy and victory. The farewell sermon laid down principles of justice, equality, and faith that would guide the Muslim world for centuries. But even as the Muslims mourned the loss of their prophet, the mission was far from over. Arabia had embraced Islam, but the wider world, vast empires to the north and east, had yet to encounter this new force rising from the desert. Part 7: The Caliphate of Abu Bakr, Apostasy, Wars and Preservation of the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad had been the unifying heart of the Muslim community. His presence had anchored the believers through battles, treaties, victories, and losses. His guidance had resolved disputes, his example had given direction, and his personal leadership had bound together tribes that had once been rivals or enemies. When he passed away in 632 CE, the 11th year after the Hijra, the grief was overwhelming. In the streets of Medina, men and women wept openly. Some refused to believe it had happened at all. Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of Muhammad's most devoted companions, stood before the people, declaring that anyone who said the Prophet was dead was mistaken, that he had only gone to meet his Lord, as Moses had once gone to Mount Sinai, and would return. It was Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, Muhammad's closest friend and the first adult male to embrace Islam, who brought clarity to the moment. Entering the mosque, he looked upon the Prophet's still form, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "O Prophet of God, you are beautiful in life and in death." Then he addressed the people. "Whoever worshipped Muhammad, let him know that Muhammad has died. But whoever worships God, God is alive and does not die." He recited a verse from the Quran. "Muhammad is but a messenger, messengers have passed away before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels?" Quran 3:144. The words settled over the crowd like a cooling wind. The reality sank in, the Prophet was gone, but his message remained. Choosing a successor. With grief still raw, a pressing question arose: who would lead the Muslim community now? The Prophet had not explicitly appointed a political successor. Leadership in Arabia was traditionally chosen by consultation among the elders and influential members of the tribes. That very day, the Ansar, the helpers from Medina, gathered at the Saqafa of Banu Sa'ida to discuss leadership. They had sheltered and defended Muhammad when he fled Mecca, and many felt the leader should come from among them. When news of the meeting reached the Muhajirin, the emigrants from Mecca, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah went quickly to join the discussion. The debate was intense. Some suggested a shared leadership, one leader from the Ansar, one from the Muhajirin. Others warned that division would weaken the unity the Prophet had built. Abu Bakr reminded them that Muhammad had said the leader should come from the Quraysh, as they were the tribe most respected among the Arabs. Then he nominated either Umar or Abu Ubaidah. Both men refused, insisting that Abu Bakr himself was the most deserving. Umar took Abu Bakr's hand and pledged allegiance to him as Caliph, Caliphate Rasul Allah, successor to the Messenger of God. One by one, the others followed. The challenges of leadership. Abu Bakr assumed leadership at a time of great uncertainty. The unity forged under Muhammad's guidance was already fraying. Tribes on the edges of Arabia had pledged allegiance to the Prophet personally, not necessarily to the faith he preached. With his death, many felt their obligations were over. Some tribes abandoned Islam altogether, returning to old practices. Others refused to pay zakat, the mandatory alms, seeing it as a tax owed only to Muhammad, not to a new leader. A few followed self-proclaimed prophets, men and women who claimed to receive divine revelation. These events threatened to unravel the entire Muslim community. Abu Bakr understood that if Medina allowed this fragmentation to continue, Islam could be reduced to a local movement rather than the unifying force it had become. The Apostasy Wars, Ridda Wars. Determined to preserve the unity of the Ummah, Abu Bakr launched a series of campaigns known as the Ridda Wars, the Wars of Apostasy. His position was firm. Refusing zakat or rejecting Islam after accepting it was not merely a personal choice, it was rebellion against the community. One of the most famous false prophets was Musaylima al-Kadhib, the liar, from the Yamama region. Musaylima claimed to share prophethood with Muhammad and had gathered a large following. Another was Talha ibn Khuwaylid in the north, who proclaimed himself a prophet and assembled warriors to challenge Medina's authority. In the south, Sajah bint al-Harith, a woman from the Christian Arab tribe of Taghlib, also claimed prophecy, eventually aligning with Musaylima before later embracing Islam. Abu Bakr sent skilled generals to confront these uprisings, chief among them Khalid ibn al-Walid, the military strategist who had once fought against Muhammad at Uhud but later embraced Islam. Under Khalid's command, Medina's forces moved rapidly, quelling rebellion after rebellion. The Battle of Yamama. The most decisive of these conflicts was the Battle of Yamama against Musaylima's forces. It was a fierce, bloody engagement. The Muslims eventually triumphed, and Musaylima was killed by Washi ibn Harb, the same man who, years earlier, had killed Muhammad's uncle Hamza at Uhud, but who had since embraced Islam. The victory at Yamama secured Central Arabia for Medina, but it came at a terrible cost. Many of those killed were Hafez, men who had memorized the entire Quran. Their loss would have consequences that Abu Bakr could not ignore. The preservation of the Quran. Until this point, the Quran had been preserved primarily through memorization and partial written records on parchment, bones, and leather. The death of so many reciters at Yamama raised a grave concern. What if more were lost in future battles? It was Umar ibn al-Khattab who urged Abu Bakr to order the collection of the Quran into a single written volume. At first, Abu Bakr hesitated. The Prophet had not done this himself, and Abu Bakr feared innovating in religious matters. But Umar argued that preserving the Quran in a compiled form was not an innovation in belief, but a necessity for safeguarding God's revelation. Abu Bakr agreed and appointed Zayd ibn Thabit, one of the Prophet's scribes, to lead the task. Zayd approached the mission with utmost care, gathering the Quran from written fragments and from the memories of reciters, verifying each verse through multiple witnesses. The compiled manuscript was kept with Abu Bakr, then later with Umar, and after Umar's death, in the possession of Hafsa bint Umar, one of the Prophet's wives. This compilation would become the foundation for the standardized Quranic text under Caliph Uthman. The campaigns beyond Arabia. Once the rebellions were suppressed, Abu Bakr turned his attention outward. The Byzantine Empire to the north and the Sasanian Empire to the east were both weakened by years of war against each other. Abu Bakr saw an opportunity not for conquest alone, but to spread Islam beyond Arabia's borders. He dispatched armies towards Syria and Iraq, beginning a process that would transform the Muslim world from a regional power into an empire spanning continents. These early campaigns were more than raids. They were the opening moves of a geopolitical shift that neither Byzantium nor Persia could fully anticipate. Abu Bakr's leadership style. Abu Bakr was known for his humility. He wore simple clothing, lived modestly, and was deeply conscious of the responsibility of leadership. In his inaugural speech as caliph, he told the people, "I have been appointed over you, but I am not the best among you. If I do well, help me. If I do wrong, correct me. Obey me as long as I obey God and His Messenger. But if I disobey God and His Messenger, you owe me no obedience." He was firm when it came to defending the unity of the Muslim community, yet gentle in personal dealings. His compassion for the poor and his unwavering honesty made him widely respected, even among those who once opposed him. The final days of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr's caliphate lasted only 2 years, from 632 to 634 CE, but those years were pivotal. He had held the community together during its most vulnerable moment, crushed the apostasy movements, initiated the preservation of the Quran, and set the stage for expansion beyond Arabia. In his final illness, he nominated Umar ibn al-Khattab as his successor, a decision that reflected his concern for stability. Umar was strong, decisive, and deeply committed to justice. Abu Bakr passed away peacefully at the age of 63, the same age at which the Prophet had died. He was buried beside Muhammad in the chamber of Aisha, fulfilling his wish to rest near his dearest friend. The legacy of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr's short but decisive leadership ensured that Islam survived the shock of the Prophet's death. His firmness in the Ridda Wars preserved the unity of the Arabian Peninsula. His foresight in compiling the Quran safeguarded the revelation for future generations. And his humility in power set a standard for Islamic leadership. The Muslims now stood on the threshold of a new era, one of expansion, governance, and contact with the great empires of the age. Under Umar ibn al-Khattab, the boundaries of the Muslim world would stretch farther than anyone could have imagined. Part 8, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Expansion, Governance, and Justice. When Abu Bakr al-Siddiq passed away in 634 CE, the young Muslim state was secure but still fragile. Arabia had been unified under Islam, the Quran had been preserved in written form, and campaigns had begun beyond the peninsula. The choice of successor was crucial. Abu Bakr, with his characteristic foresight, had nominated Umar ibn al-Khattab. A decision that reflected not only trust, but also recognition of the qualities needed for the next phase of the Ummah's journey. Umar was known for his towering physical presence, his uncompromising sense of justice, and his sharp intellect. Before Islam, he had been one of its fiercest opponents. After his conversion, he became one of its strongest defenders. The Prophet Muhammad had once prayed, "O Allah, strengthen Islam with either Umar ibn al-Khattab or Abu Jahl." That prayer had been answered in Umar's embrace of the faith. When Umar took the oath as Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the faithful, the Muslim community stood at a crossroads. Under his leadership, they would step decisively onto the stage of world history. The state of the Ummah in 634 CE. By the time Umar assumed leadership, the Arabian Peninsula was politically stable. The tribal rebellions had been quelled, and the first expeditions into Byzantine and Sasanian territories were underway. Yet, these were still early probes, small armies testing the borders of ancient empires. Umar inherited both opportunity and risk. The Byzantine Empire in the west had been weakened by decades of war with the Sasanians. The Sasanian Empire in the east was internally divided and facing its own crises. Muslim forces were small compared to the armies of these empires, but they were disciplined, united, and driven by a sense of mission. The expansion into Syria and Palestine. The first major campaigns of Umar's caliphate focused on the Levant. Abu Bakr had already dispatched armies there under the leadership of seasoned commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, and Amr ibn al-Az. Under Umar's rule, these efforts intensified. One of the defining battles was the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE. Facing a massive Byzantine force, the Muslims, outnumbered, but strategically brilliant under Khalid, achieved a decisive victory. The battle was fought over 6 days, with shifting lines and fierce engagements, but the discipline of the Muslim forces and the unity of command tipped the balance. The fall of Byzantine control in Syria opened the way to Palestine. By 637 CE, Jerusalem was surrounded. The city's Christian patriarch, Sophronius, agreed to surrender on the condition that Umar himself come to receive the keys. Umar's entry into Jerusalem. Umar's journey to Jerusalem is one of the most iconic moments in Islamic history. He traveled not with a grand escort, but with a single servant and one camel, taking turns riding it. As they approached the city, he was dressed in simple clothes, his humility in stark contrast to the splendor of the Byzantine court. In Jerusalem, Umar was shown the Temple Mount, which had been neglected and used as a dump. He personally began cleaning the site, establishing it as a place of prayer. This would later become the location of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Covenant of Umar, agreed upon with the city's Christian leaders, guaranteed protection for the people of Jerusalem, their churches, and their property in exchange for the payment of the jizya, a tax for non-Muslims in return for exemption from military service and protection by the state. This set a precedent for relations between Muslims and other faiths in conquered territories. The conquest of the Sasanian Empire. While the Levant was being secured, the eastern front against the Sasanian Persians was also active. The Muslims had already won a significant victory at Al-Qadisiyah in 636 CE under the command of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. The battle was hard fought, with the famed Persian war elephants posing a major challenge, but the Muslims adapted and prevailed. This victory opened the way to Ctesiphon, the Sasanian capital. Known for its grandeur and wealth, the city fell to the Muslims, and much of its treasure was sent to Medina, including the legendary jeweled carpet known as the Spring of Khosrow. Umar, wary of excess, had it cut into pieces and distributed among the people. The decisive blow to the Sasanian Empire came in 642 CE at the Battle of Nahavand, often called the Victory of Victories. After this, Persian resistance collapsed, and vast territories of Iraq and Iran came under Muslim control. Egypt and beyond. The expansion did not stop there. In 639 CE, Amr ibn al-As led an expedition into Egypt, then a province of the Byzantine Empire. The capture of Fustat, near modern Cairo, and the strategic fortress of Babylon paved the way for Muslim control of the fertile Nile Valley. Egypt became a vital source of grain for the growing Muslim state. By the end of Umar's 10-year caliphate, the Muslim world stretched from Libya in the west to Iran in the east, encompassing some of the most fertile and populous lands of the ancient world. Governance and administration. Umar's genius was not limited to the battlefield. He recognized that expansion without effective governance would lead to chaos. His administrative reforms became the foundation of the Islamic State for generations. Key elements of Umar's governance included provincial administration. He divided the empire into provinces, each governed by an appointed emir responsible for law, order, and tax collection. Governors were held accountable, often required to appear in Medina to answer complaints. Judicial system. He appointed qadis, judges, in major cities to apply Islamic law fairly and impartially. Public treasury. Bayt al-Mal. Umar established a central treasury to manage state revenues, including zakat, jizya, and war spoils, ensuring they were distributed according to need. Stipend system. A register was created to provide stipends to all Muslims, with higher amounts for those who had embraced Islam earliest or contributed most in battle. Infrastructure. He ordered the construction of canals, roads, and rest houses for travelers. Mosques were built not just for worship but as community centers. Justice as a defining principle. Umar was famously strict about justice, for himself as much as for others. He lived simply, wore patched clothes, and often walked the streets at night to see the condition of his people firsthand. Stories of his fairness became legendary. Once, a complaint was brought against his own son. Umar did not shield him, the law was applied equally. In Egypt, the son of a governor struck a Christian man unjustly. Umar summoned the governor and his son to Medina, gave the Christian a whip, and told him to strike back. He then turned to the governor and said, "Since when have you enslaved people who were born free?" A caliph's humility. Despite ruling over a vast empire, Umar refused luxury. He often slept on a simple mat in the mosque and ate coarse bread. When envoys from foreign lands arrived expecting a ruler surrounded by pomp, they were astonished to find him mending his own clothes or lying under the shade of a palm tree without guards. He saw himself not as a king, but as a servant of the people, responsible before God for every person under his care. The martyrdom of Umar. In 644 CE, Umar's life came to a sudden and tragic end. While leading the dawn prayer in the Mosque of Medina, he was attacked by Abu Lu'lu'a Firas, a Persian slave with a grievance against his master. Umar was stabbed multiple times and collapsed. Knowing his death was near, Umar appointed a council of 6 senior companions to choose the next caliph, ensuring the decision would be made by consensus. He refused to name a successor outright, believing the community should decide. Umar died a few days later at the age of 63, and was buried beside Abu Bakr and the Prophet Muhammad, a testament to the bond between the three. The legacy of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar's decade as caliph transformed the Muslim world. He expanded its borders farther than anyone could have imagined in so short a time. He established administrative systems that balanced authority with accountability. His unwavering commitment to justice set a standard that rulers throughout history would strive, and often fail, to meet. Under his leadership, Islam was no longer just a faith centered in Arabia, it had become the foundation of a civilization stretching across continents. The world had taken notice, and the great empires of the age now had to reckon with this new power rising from the desert. But with Umar gone, the unity and stability of the Ummah would soon face new strains, and under his successor, Uthman ibn Affan, the first cracks would begin to show. Part 9, Uthman ibn Affan, compilation of the Quran and growing discontent. When Umar ibn al-Khattab was struck down in 644 CE, the Muslim world was an empire in its own right. Its borders stretched across vast lands, from the fertile valleys of the Nile to the rugged mountains of Persia, and its influence reached into the heartlands of civilizations that had once seemed unshakable. As Umar lay dying, he refused to appoint a single successor. Instead, he entrusted the decision to a council of 6 companions, all prominent figures who had been close to the Prophet Muhammad. Their task was to choose the next caliph, a leader who could preserve the unity of the Ummah and guide it with justice. The selection of Uthman ibn Affan. The 6 members of Umar's council were Ali ibn Abi Talib, Uthman ibn Affan, Abdurrahman ibn Awf, Talha ibn Ubaydallah, Zubair ibn al-Awwam, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. After days of deliberation and private consultations with the people of Medina, Abdurrahman ibn Awf announced his decision: Uthman ibn Affan would be the new caliph. Uthman, from the powerful Umayyad clan of the Quraysh, was known for his wealth, generosity, and piety. He was one of the earliest converts to Islam, had married 2 of the Prophet's daughters, one after the other passed away, earning him the title Dhul Nurayn, the possessor of 2 lights, and had served as a trusted advisor under both Abu Bakr and Umar. At around 70 years old, Uthman's demeanor was gentle and his manner humble. Yet he was stepping into a role that would require firmness, political wisdom, and the ability to manage an empire undergoing rapid change. The expansion continues. Under Uthman's leadership, the Muslim conquests continued at a remarkable pace. In the west, North Africa saw further expansion beyond Egypt, with Muslim forces establishing strongholds along the coast. In the east, campaigns penetrated deeper into Persia and reached the edges of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. In the north, expeditions were launched into Armenia, Azerbaijan, and parts of Anatolia. At sea, Muslim naval power began to emerge. The conquest of Cyprus marked the first major Islamic naval operation, opening new horizons in the Mediterranean. Uthman's reign was one of geographic and economic growth, with trade routes expanding and wealth flowing into the public treasury. But with this expansion came new complexities, diverse populations, differing regional interests, and the challenge of maintaining cohesion across vast distances. The Quran, from recitation to standardized text. Perhaps Uthman's most enduring legacy is his role in the standardization of the Quran. After the Prophet's death, the Quran existed in written fragments and in the memories of reciters. Abu Bakr had initiated its first compilation into a single manuscript, preserved with Hafsa bint Umar. Over the years, Islam spread to distant lands, and Muslims from different regions, each with their own dialects, began to recite the Quran with slight variations in pronunciation and wording. These differences, though often minor, risked causing confusion and division. Reports reached Uthman that disputes were arising among soldiers from different provinces about the correct recitation. To preserve the unity of the text, Uthman ordered that an official, standardized copy be made based on the compilation in Hafsa's possession. He appointed a committee led by Zayd ibn Thabit to prepare the master copy in the Quraysh dialect, the dialect in which the Quran had been revealed. Multiple copies of this standardized text were produced and sent to key Islamic cities, Kufa, Basra, Damascus, Mecca, and others, each accompanied by a qualified reciter to teach it. Uthman also ordered that all other personal copies and written fragments that differed from this standard be burned, not out of disrespect, but to prevent variations from taking root. This act preserved the Quran in a single, unified form that has remained unchanged to this day. The administration and provincial governance. Like Umar, Uthman maintained the provincial system, appointing governors, walis, to oversee the administration, collect taxes, and enforce the law. However, Uthman's appointments increasingly drew from his own Umayyad clan, men he trusted, many of whom were capable administrators, but whose closeness to the caliph also fed perceptions of favoritism. In distant provinces, this favoritism was interpreted differently depending on local conditions. In some regions, the governor's efficiency and loyalty to Medina were valued. In others, especially where political rivalry simmered, Uthman's reliance on Umayyads was seen as nepotism. These perceptions would eventually fuel unrest. The growing discontent. In the early years of Uthman's caliphate, prosperity and expansion brought general satisfaction. But over time, certain tensions began to surface. Economic changes: with vast new lands came wealth, but also disparities. The stipend system established under Umar, which prioritized early converts and veterans of major battles, began to create divisions. Newer Muslims, particularly in far-flung provinces, sometimes felt disadvantaged. Governors' authority: some governors ruled with a heavy hand. Complaints reached Medina, and while Uthman did occasionally remove governors, in many cases he stood by his appointees, believing loyalty to central authority was essential. Political opposition: figures with personal or tribal grievances began to find common cause in criticizing the caliph's policies. Among these were some who had never fully accepted Umayyad leadership. The expansion strain. Rapid growth meant that administrative systems were stretched thin. The need to maintain armies far from Arabia and manage new populations brought constant challenges. The opposition organizes. By the later years of Uthman's rule, discontent had spread to several key provinces, notably Egypt, Kufa, and Basra. Opposition leaders began coordinating, sending letters and messengers between cities. While some of their grievances were about specific governors, others targeted Uthman personally, accusing him of mismanagement. Uthman attempted to address the complaints, offering to replace governors or hear cases in Medina. But the distance, the complexity of provincial politics, and the determination of some opposition figures to undermine his rule made resolution difficult. The Siege of Uthman. In 656 CE, delegations of rebels from Egypt, Kufa, and Basra converged on Medina. They demanded Uthman step down. The caliph refused, insisting that he would not abandon his post while the Ummah needed him. The situation escalated into a siege. For weeks, Uthman was confined to his house. Many companions urged him to fight back, but he forbade violence, unwilling to shed Muslim blood over his own position. During the siege, Uthman continued to lead as best he could, sending instructions to governors, reading the Quran daily, and reminding those around him that patience in the face of trial was a form of worship. The assassination. One day, the rebels forced their way into his home. Uthman, fasting at the time, sat calmly with the Quran open before him. According to tradition, the page before him contained the verse, "So Allah will suffice you against them. He is the hearing, the knowing." Quran 2:137. The rebels struck him down, and his blood fell upon the page. He was 82 years old. The assassination of Uthman was a shock that reverberated throughout the Muslim world. It was the first time a caliph had been killed by fellow Muslims. His death shattered the unity that had held since the Prophet's time and plunged the Ummah into its first major civil war. The legacy of Uthman. Despite the turmoil of his final years, Uthman's achievements were significant. He expanded the Muslim world to its largest extent yet. He preserved the Quran in a standardized form that remains to this day. He maintained the prosperity and military strength inherited from Umar, even as the empire grew more complex. But his assassination marked the beginning of a new, turbulent chapter. His successor would face not only the challenge of ruling a vast empire, but also the task of healing deep divisions that would not be easily mended. That successor would be Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, whose caliphate would be defined by conflict, principle, and tragedy. Part 10, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Civil strife, the first fitna, and the birth of sects. When Uthman ibn Affan was assassinated in 656 CE, Medina was in shock. The caliph's blood had been shed not by foreign enemies, but by Muslims, some of them from within the very community that had once stood shoulder to shoulder in prayer behind the Prophet Muhammad. For weeks before his death, Medina had been surrounded by rebels from Egypt, Kufa, and Basra. The city's older companions, those who had fought in the Prophet's battles and memorized his words, were divided over how to handle the crisis. Some wanted to protect Uthman by force, others urged him to step down for the sake of unity, still others were absent entirely, living in distant provinces. The assassination left a power vacuum that could not be ignored. Without a leader, the unity of the Muslim community, already fragile, risked complete collapse. The reluctant caliph. In the aftermath of Uthman's death, the rebels who had occupied Medina turned to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Cousin and son-in-law to the Prophet Muhammad, Ali had been among the earliest converts to Islam and had fought in nearly every major battle of the Prophet's life. His knowledge of the Quran, his bravery, and his reputation for justice made him a natural choice for leadership in the eyes of many. But Ali was deeply hesitant. He understood that the caliphate he was being offered was unlike those of Abu Bakr, Umar, or even Uthman's earlier years. This was not a united Ummah at peace, it was an empire on the brink of civil war. Accepting leadership now meant inheriting a house already on fire. Yet the pressure was immense. Crowds gathered at the mosque, urging him to accept. The danger of further chaos was too great. Finally, Ali agreed, but on the condition that the pledge of allegiance, bay'ah, come from the people freely, not from force or intimidation. The bay'ah was given in the Mosque of Medina. Many prominent companions pledged their loyalty, among them Ammar ibn Yasir and Malik al-Ashta, but others, including some of the Prophet's wives and senior companions like Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, governor of Syria, withheld their allegiance. The demands for justice. The central political wound of the moment was Uthman's assassination. His family and supporters demanded that his killers be found and punished immediately. But Ali faced an impossible situation. Many of the rebels who had surrounded Uthman were still in Medina, and some had even joined the ranks of those urging Ali's leadership. Acting against them without first stabilizing the state could lead to open rebellion before his rule had even begun. Ali argued for patience, for time to restore order before launching investigations. But to Uthman's relatives, particularly Muawiyah in Syria, this looked like evasion. Tensions deepened. The road to the Battle of the Camel. Among those who withheld immediate allegiance to Ali were Aisha bint Abi Bakr, widow of the Prophet, and two prominent companions, Talha ibn Ubaydullah and Zubair ibn al-Awwam. They too demanded justice for Uthman and were critical of Ali's perceived delay. In 656 CE, they gathered forces in Basra, Iraq, with the stated aim of rallying the people to avenge Uthman's death. Ali saw their movement as a challenge to his authority and a threat to unity. Determined to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, he marched from Medina to meet them, hoping to negotiate. For a brief moment, it seemed peace might prevail. Talks were held, and an understanding appeared possible. But in the night, fighting broke out, some say instigated by Uthman's killers, who feared that reconciliation would expose them. The next day, the Battle of the Camel erupted, named for the camel upon which Aisha rode as she directed her forces. The fighting was fierce but short. Talha and Zubair were killed, and Aisha's side was defeated. Ali treated her with respect, escorting her safely back to Medina. The battle left deep scars. For the first time, Muslims had fought one another in a full-scale war. Brothers in faith had faced each other across a battlefield, and the unity of the Ummah had been irreversibly fractured. The standoff with Muawiyah. With Basra subdued, Ali turned his attention to Syria. There, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the powerful governor and relative of Uthman, refused to recognize Ali's authority until Uthman's killers were punished. Muawiyah was a skilled politician and military leader, controlling a wealthy and strategically vital province. His refusal to pledge allegiance posed a direct challenge to the caliphate. The standoff could not last forever. In 657 CE, the two armies met at Siffin, near the Euphrates River. The Battle of Siffin. The battle began with skirmishes and duels, but quickly escalated into days of heavy fighting. Casualties mounted on both sides. As the conflict dragged on, Muawiyah's forces, under the counsel of his advisor Amr ibn al-As, resorted to a dramatic gesture. They raised copies of the Quran on their lances, calling for the matter to be settled by God's word rather than by the sword. The sight shook many in Ali's army. Reluctant to continue fighting against men who were now appealing to the Quran, they pressured Ali to agree to arbitration. Ali himself was wary. He suspected this was a ploy, but the momentum in his camp left him little choice. The arbitration and its fallout. The arbitration process was meant to determine who should rightly be caliph. Ali appointed Abu Musa al-Ash'ari as his representative. Muawiyah appointed Amr ibn al-As. When the two met, Abu Musa declared that both sides should step down and allow the community to choose a new leader. Amr, however, immediately announced that he confirmed Muawiyah as caliph. The move was seen as a political trick, one that humiliated Ali's side and further eroded his authority. The emergence of the Khawarij. Among those most angered by the arbitration were a group of Ali's own supporters who believed accepting human arbitration in a matter where God had given guidance was sinful. They broke away, declaring, La hukma illa lillah, judgment belongs to God alone. These rebels, known as the Khawarij, those who go out, became a militant faction, condemning both Ali and Muawiyah as illegitimate. Their extreme views and violent tactics posed a new threat to stability. The Battle of Narawan. Ali attempted to reason with the Khawarij, urging them to return to the community. Some did, but many remained defiant, attacking civilians and caravans. In 658 CE, Ali's forces confronted them at Narawan. The battle was swift and devastating for the Khawarij, but their ideology survived, influencing later movements. The decline of Ali's position. With resources drained, internal opposition constant, and Muawiyah consolidating control in Syria and Egypt, Ali's position weakened. His authority was strong in Iraq and parts of Persia, but elsewhere, governors acted with increasing independence. In 661 CE, as Ali prepared for renewed conflict with Muawiyah, tragedy struck. While leading the dawn prayer in the Mosque of Kufa, Ali was attacked by a Khawarij assassin named Abd al-Rahman ibn Muljam, who struck him with a poisoned sword. Ali died 2 days later. The aftermath. After Ali's death, his son Hassan ibn Ali briefly became caliph, but soon abdicated in a treaty with Muawiyah to avoid further bloodshed. Muawiyah then established the Umayyad Caliphate, marking the beginning of hereditary dynastic rule in the Islamic world. Ali's supporters, however, never ceased to revere him as the rightful successor to the Prophet. Over time, their political loyalty evolved into a distinct theological position. The belief that leadership of the Muslim community should remain within the Prophet's family. This belief became the foundation of Shi'ism. Those who upheld the legitimacy of all four rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, became the majority Sunni tradition. The split between Sunni and Shia, rooted in the political events of Ali's caliphate, would become one of the most enduring divisions in Islamic history. The legacy of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Ali is remembered for his deep knowledge of the Quran, his eloquence, and his unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of political disaster. His sermons and sayings, many preserved in later collections, reveal a man who saw leadership as a trust, not a prize. But his caliphate also stands as a cautionary tale about the fragility of unity. The first fitna showed how quickly political disputes could fracture the ummah, and how difficult it was to heal those wounds once blood had been shed. Ali was buried near Kufa, in present-day Iraq, at a site that would become the city of Najaf, one of the holiest places in Shia Islam. Part 11, the Umayyad Dynasty, Expansion from Spain to India and Administrative Innovations. The death of Ali ibn Abi Talib in 661 CE marked the end of the era of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs. The unity of the Muslim world had been strained by years of civil war, political rivalries, and deepening factionalism. Into this environment stepped Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, governor of Syria and a masterful political strategist. Muawiyah's rise would mark the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate, the first great Islamic dynasty, and with it, a shift in the nature of leadership from a consultative, election-based system to a hereditary monarchy. This change would profoundly shape the political history of the Muslim world. The road to power. Muawiyah was a member of the Umayyad clan of the Quraysh, the same clan that had once been among the fiercest opponents of Islam. He was also a relative of the slain Caliph Uthman ibn Affan. During Ali's caliphate, Muawiyah had refused to recognize him until Uthman's killers were punished. The dispute culminated in the Battle of Siffin and the arbitration process that fractured Ali's authority. When Ali was assassinated and his son Hassan briefly assumed the caliphate, Muawiyah seized the moment. Hassan, seeking to avoid another cycle of civil war, agreed to abdicate in exchange for a peace treaty. The terms included assurances for the safety of Hassan's followers and a promise that the caliphate would not become hereditary. In 661 CE, Muawiyah entered Kufa, the seat of the caliphate, and was recognized as the sole ruler of the Muslim world. The shift to hereditary rule. Muawiyah ruled from Damascus, making it the new political capital of the Islamic Empire. His style of governance was pragmatic and centralized. He maintained peace through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and, when necessary, decisive military action. But the most controversial change came when he designated his son Yazid as his successor, breaking with the precedent of consultation, shura, that had chosen previous caliphs. This decision angered many, especially in Medina and among those loyal to the Prophet's family, and would eventually lead to the tragedy of Karbala in 680 CE. The Umayyad administrative machine. Under Muawiyah and his successors, the Umayyads developed an administrative system capable of managing a vast and diverse empire. Some of the key features included provincial governors, appointed directly by the caliph. Governors were given broad powers over taxation, law enforcement, and military affairs in their territories. Diwan system. The Diwan, or administrative register, organized tax collection and distribution of stipends to soldiers and early Muslim settlers. Bureaucratic reforms. Over time, the administration adopted Arabic as the official language, replacing Greek in the West and Persian in the East. This linguistic unification helped consolidate Islamic identity. Postal and intelligence networks. A system of mounted couriers carried official communications swiftly across the empire, while informants kept the caliph informed of provincial affairs. Coinage. The Umayyads introduced standardized Islamic coinage bearing Arabic inscriptions and Quranic phrases, replacing Byzantine and Sasanian designs. Military expansion, westward to Spain. The Umayyads presided over the largest territorial expansion in Islamic history. In the west, Muslim forces pushed across North Africa, defeating the Byzantine strongholds along the coast. The conversion of the Berber tribes brought new allies into the fold. In 711 CE, a Berber general named Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the narrow strait from North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula. The strait would later bear his name, Jabal Tariq, or Gibraltar. Within a few years, Muslim forces had defeated the Visigothic kingdom and established control over much of Spain, which they called Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus would become a beacon of Islamic civilization in Europe, renowned for its architecture, scholarship, and cultural blending. Military expansion, eastward to the Indus. While the west saw the birth of Al-Andalus, the eastern front surged forward into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. In 712 CE, Muhammad ibn Qasim, a young general, led the conquest of Sindh, in modern-day Pakistan. This brought Islam into contact with Hindu and Buddhist cultures, beginning a centuries-long interaction between the Muslim world and South Asia. In Central Asia, Muslim armies crossed the Oxus River, clashing with the Turkic tribes and extending influence into regions that would later become important centers of Islamic learning. Tensions beneath the surface. Despite their achievements, the Umayyads faced persistent opposition. Several factors fueled discontent. Dynastic rule. Many Muslims, especially those loyal to the memory of the Prophet's family, al-Bayt, rejected hereditary succession. Arab-centric policies. Non-Arab converts, Mawali, often faced social and economic discrimination, being excluded from certain privileges reserved for Arabs. Factional rivalries. Old tribal rivalries between northern, Qays, and southern, Yemen, Arabs persisted, sometimes erupting into open conflict. Religious opposition. Pious Muslims criticized the perceived worldliness and luxury of some Umayyad rulers, seeing them as straying from the humility of the Prophet's example. The tragedy of Karbala. The most defining moment of Umayyad controversy came shortly after Muawiyah's death in 680 CE, when his son Yazid became caliph. Several prominent figures refused to pledge allegiance, including Husayn ibn Ali, grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. Husayn traveled from Mecca toward Kufa, answering calls from supporters who urged him to challenge Yazid's rule. But near the town of Karbala in Iraq, Husayn and his small band of followers, vastly outnumbered and cut off from water, were surrounded by Yazid's forces. On the 10th day of Muharram, known as Ashura, Husayn and most of his male companions were killed. Karbala became a symbol of resistance against tyranny and a foundational moment for Shia identity, deepening the Sunni-Shia divide. The later Umayyad caliphs. After Yazid, the Umayyad dynasty saw periods of both consolidation and turmoil. Caliphs such as Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, r. 685–705, and his son al-Walid r. 705–715, strengthened the state, oversaw monumental building projects like the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and pushed expansion to its furthest extent. The Dome of the Rock, with its golden dome and intricate mosaics, stood not only as a religious monument but also as a political statement. A declaration of the glory and permanence of the Islamic State. Cultural integration and the spread of Islam. As the empire expanded, Islam spread through trade, intermarriage, and gradual cultural exchange as much as through conquest. In cities from Damascus to Córdoba, Arabic became the language of administration, law, and scholarship. Non-Arabs who converted to Islam increasingly demanded equal status, and by the later Umayyad period, reforms began to address these grievances, though not quickly enough to prevent rebellion. The seeds of revolution. By the mid-8th century, opposition coalesced around a movement that appealed to both disaffected Arabs and non-Arab Muslims, as well as Shia supporters of the Prophet's family. This movement found a unifying symbol in the descendants of al-Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, giving birth to the Abbasid Revolution. In 750 CE, the Umayyad dynasty fell to the Abbasids in a dramatic overthrow. Most of the Umayyad family was killed, but one prince, Abd al-Rahman I, escaped across North Africa to Spain, where he established the independent Umayyad Emirate of Córdoba. The Umayyad legacy. The Umayyads transformed the caliphate from a small Arabian polity into a global empire. They built the administrative systems that would underpin Islamic governance for centuries, spread Arabic as a unifying language, and left a legacy of monumental architecture and cultural blending. Yet their centralization of power, emphasis on Arab privilege, and dynastic succession created divisions that would echo through Islamic history. They laid the foundations of empire, but also planted the seeds of rebellion. The Abbasids who succeeded them would inherit both the benefits and the burdens of ruling such a vast, diverse world. Part 12, The Abbasid Golden Age, Baghdad, Knowledge, and Cultural Flourishing. When the Abbasid Revolution swept across the Islamic world in 750 CE, it was more than just a change of dynasty. It was a political and cultural turning point. The Umayyad dynasty, with its Arab-centered administration and focus on territorial expansion, had built an empire. The Abbasids, claiming descent from al-Abbas, an uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, promised a new vision, one that would embrace all Muslims, Arab and non-Arab alike, and shift the focus from conquest to consolidation, governance, and cultural development. The rise of the Abbasids. The Abbasid movement had gathered support from many quarters. Non-Arab Muslims, Mawali, who had felt marginalized under Umayyad rule. Shia factions who hoped the new dynasty would favor the Prophet's family. Disaffected Arabs from tribes excluded from the Umayyad elite. Merchants and scholars who saw in the Abbasids the promise of stability and justice. Their revolution began in Khorasan, a region in northeastern Persia, modern Iran, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan, under the leadership of Abu Muslim, a charismatic and skilled commander. In a series of decisive victories, the Abbasids dismantled Umayyad control. By 750 CE, the last Umayyad caliph, Marwan II, had been defeated at the Battle of the Great Zab in Mesopotamia. The Abbasids declared Abu al-Abbas al-Safa as the new caliph, his title meaning the bloodshedder, a nod to the ruthless suppression of Umayyad remnants. Shifting the center of power. Unlike the Umayyads, who had ruled from Damascus, the Abbasids wanted a capital closer to their Persian power base and the rich trade routes of the east. In 762 CE, the second Abbasid caliph, al-Mansur, founded a new city on the banks of the Tigris River, Baghdad. Baghdad's design was unlike any other city of the time. Built as a perfect circle, its outer walls and four monumental gates enclosed a series of concentric rings. At the center stood the caliph's palace and the Grand Mosque. From the beginning, Baghdad was intended not just as an administrative hub, but as a symbol of Abbasid power, wealth, and cosmopolitan ambition. Its location was strategic. Close to the old Persian capital of Ctesiphon, linking it to ancient administrative traditions. At the crossroads of caravan routes from Central Asia, India, and the Mediterranean. Along the Tigris, enabling easy river transport and trade. The cosmopolitan capital. Baghdad quickly grew into the largest and most vibrant city in the world. Its streets buzzed with merchants selling silks from China, spices from India, glassware from Syria, and furs from the north. Artisans worked in copper, silver, and gold. Poets recited in marketplaces. Scholars debated in mosques, palaces, and private salons. The population was a mosaic of cultures: Arabs, Persians, Turks, Greeks, Indians, Africans, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists all found a place here. The Abbasid court employed translators, doctors, architects, and administrators from every corner of the known world. The House of Wisdom. One of the Abbasids' most enduring contributions to world history was their patronage of knowledge. Under the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, r. 786–809, and especially his son al-Ma'mun, r. 813–833, Baghdad became home to the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. The House of Wisdom was more than a library. It was a translation center where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Syriac works were rendered into Arabic. A research institute where scholars worked on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, geography, and philosophy. A repository of knowledge, preserving texts that might otherwise have been lost to history. Here, Euclid's geometry, Ptolemy's astronomy, Galen's medicine, and Aristotle's philosophy were studied alongside Indian mathematical texts and Persian treatises on administration. Scholars like al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, advanced medicine, and al-Biruni explored geography and astronomy. Science and innovation. The Abbasid era saw remarkable advancements. Mathematics. Al-Khwarizmi's works laid the foundations of algebra and introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals to the Islamic world, and eventually to Europe. Medicine. Hospitals in Baghdad provided free care, staffed by physicians trained in systematic diagnosis and treatment. The works of Hunayn ibn Ishaq and later al-Razi, expanded medical knowledge. Astronomy. Observatories were built to refine astronomical tables and improve navigation. Geography. Scholars like al-Idrisi created detailed maps of the known world, incorporating knowledge from travelers and merchants. Engineering. Inventions included sophisticated water clocks, mechanical devices, and advances in irrigation. Culture and literature. Baghdad under the Abbasids was also a city of poets and storytellers. The court of Harun al-Rashid became legendary, immortalized in the tales of 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, with its mix of real historical figures and fantastical adventures. Poets like Abu Nuwas explored themes of love, wine, and wit, while scholars compiled vast encyclopedias of history and literature. Al-Jaiz, a Basran writer, produced works on everything from zoology to social satire. Calligraphy flourished as an art form, adorning Qurans, architecture, and textiles. Architecture itself reached new heights in grandeur, palaces, mosques, and gardens built with intricate tile work and domes that reflected the wealth and aesthetic sensibilities of the age. Trade and economic prosperity. The Abbasid Caliphate sat at the heart of the global trade network. The Silk Road funneled goods from China, maritime routes brought spices and gems from India and Southeast Asia, gold and ivory came from Africa, and furs and amber arrived from Northern Europe. Baghdad's markets were organized into specialized districts, one for perfumes, another for books, another for fabrics. The city's merchants developed sophisticated credit and banking systems, allowing for safe and efficient long-distance trade. Religious and legal developments. The Abbasid period also saw the crystallization of Islamic law, Sharia, and the emergence of the major schools of jurisprudence, madhabs. Scholars like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam al-Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal systematized legal reasoning, codifying rules for worship, commerce, family life, and governance. The hadith sciences also developed, with scholars traveling vast distances to collect and verify reports of the Prophet's sayings and actions. The great hadith compilations, such as Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, were products of this era. Challenges beneath the splendor. Despite its brilliance, the Abbasid Golden Age was not without problems. Provincial autonomy. As the empire grew, distant provinces gained more independence, sometimes becoming virtually autonomous under local dynasties. Sectarian divisions, Sunni and Shia tensions persisted, with some Shia revolts challenging Abbasid legitimacy. Court intrigue, factionalism within the Abbasid court often led to political instability. Economic strains, the cost of maintaining a sprawling empire and lavish court could strain the treasury. The legacy of the Golden Age. The Abbasid Golden Age left a lasting mark on world history. It preserved and expanded human knowledge, influencing not only the Islamic world but also medieval Europe through the later translations of Arabic works into Latin. Baghdad became a symbol of intellectual and cultural achievement, a place where faith and reason were not seen as enemies, but as complementary paths to truth. This period demonstrated the power of a civilization that could absorb, adapt, and synthesize the wisdom of many cultures, creating something entirely new. But the Abbasids' glory would not last forever. Internal divisions, regional autonomy, and foreign threats, especially from the rising powers of the steppe, would eventually weaken the central authority. The Golden City on the Tigris would face challenges that no walls could keep out. Part 13, Science, Philosophy, and Art in the Islamic Golden Age. The Abbasid Caliphate's political power and wealth created fertile ground for something extraordinary, a civilizational explosion of knowledge, art, and innovation unmatched in much of the medieval world. From the late 8th century to the mid-13th century, the Muslim world became a bridge, and often a laboratory, for ideas from across continents. This period, often called the Islamic Golden Age, was not just about preserving ancient knowledge. It was about building upon it, challenging it, and transforming it into something entirely new. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad and other cities became global capitals of learning, science, literature, and artistic expression. The culture of knowledge. The intellectual achievements of the Islamic Golden Age were not an accident. They grew from a unique combination of factors. Wealth from trade. The Abbasids controlled key points along the Silk Road, maritime trade routes, and regional markets, creating surpluses that could fund education, scholarship, and patronage. Political stability. In early centuries, at least in the first century of Abbasid rule, strong central authority allowed resources to be channeled into long-term projects. Cultural synthesis. The empire's population included Arabs, Persians, Turks, Berbers, Indians, Chinese, Greeks, and others. Their intellectual traditions converged in Abbasid cities. Religious encouragement. The Quran and Hadith emphasized the pursuit of knowledge as a form of worship, inspiring scholars across fields. The Abbasid court, especially under Harun al-Rashid and al-Ma'mun, turned this culture into policy. They sought out manuscripts from Byzantium, India, and beyond, paying richly for their translation into Arabic. The House of Wisdom, a hub of translation and research. The Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, was the crown jewel of Abbasid intellectual life. Founded under Harun al-Rashid and expanded by al-Ma'mun, it served multiple roles. Translation Bureau, teams of scholars, often working in multiple languages, translated works from Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, and Syriac into Arabic. This included mathematical treatises, medical manuals, astronomical charts, and philosophical dialogues. Research Center, scholars didn't just translate, they annotated, corrected, and expanded upon ancient works. Library, the House of Wisdom amassed thousands of manuscripts, making it one of the largest libraries of its time. Among the translators was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, an Nestorian Christian physician who rendered the works of Galen and Hippocrates into Arabic, ensuring their survival and influence on Islamic and European medicine. Mathematics, from algebra to algorithms. The Abbasid era saw mathematics transformed from practical calculation into a sophisticated, theoretical science. Al-Khwarizmi, often called the father of algebra, his Kitab al-Jabr wa al-Muqabala systematized solutions to linear and quadratic equations. The word algebra itself comes from al-Jabr, meaning completion or restoration. His works introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals and the concept of zero to the Islamic world, concepts that would later revolutionize mathematics in Europe. His name also gave us the term algorithm. Thabit ibn Qurra expanded Greek geometry, contributed to number theory, and introduced translations of Archimedes' works. Omar Khayyam, known in the West for his poetry, he also classified cubic equations and made significant advances in understanding the parallel postulate in geometry. Mathematics during the Golden Age was not an isolated discipline, it was tightly linked to astronomy, engineering, and commerce. Astronomy, mapping the heavens. Accurate astronomical knowledge was important not just for navigation and agriculture, but also for determining prayer times and the direction of Mecca, Qibla. Al-Battani improved measurements of the solar year, refined Ptolemy's planetary data, and influenced later European astronomers like Copernicus. Al-Sufi produced the Book of Fixed Stars, updating Ptolemaic star charts and describing new constellations. Al-Biruni measured the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy and proposed the existence of a landmass between Asia and Europe, centuries before the discovery of the Americas. Observatories in Baghdad, Damascus, and later in Moraga were equipped with astrolabes, armillary spheres, and other instruments for celestial measurement. Medicine, healing body and mind. Hospitals, by Maristans, became a hallmark of Abbasid cities. They were staffed by trained physicians, open to all regardless of religion or background, and often free of charge. Al-Razi, Raises, wrote extensively on medicine, including the comprehensive book on medicine and a pioneering text on smallpox and measles. He emphasized clinical observation and was critical of superstition in healing. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, his canon of medicine synthesized Greek, Persian, and Indian medical knowledge. It became the standard medical text in both the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. Hunayn ibn Ishaq not only translated medical works but also advanced pharmacology and the understanding of anatomy. Hospitals served as training centers, where students learned through practical apprenticeship, lectures, and examinations. Philosophy, dialogue across civilizations. The Abbasid Golden Age embraced falsafa, the study of philosophy based on Greek traditions, and sought to reconcile it with Islamic thought. Al-Farabi explored political philosophy, ethics, and metaphysics, building upon Plato and Aristotle. Ibn Sina integrated Aristotelian logic with Neoplatonic ideas, influencing Islamic theology and medieval European philosophy. Ibn Rushd, Averroes, though based in Al-Andalus, his commentaries on Aristotle became central to European scholasticism. Theological scholars, Mutakallimun, often engaged with philosophers, sometimes clashing over issues like the eternity of the world or the nature of God's attributes. These debates enriched both Islamic theology, kalam, and philosophy. Geography and exploration. The Abbasid world was vast, and its scholars documented it in meticulous detail. Ibn Khordadbeh wrote Book of Roads and Kingdoms, detailing trade routes across the empire and beyond. Al-Idrisi, commissioned by the Norman king of Sicily, he produced one of the most detailed medieval world maps. Ibn Battuta, later, in the 14th century, his travels spanned from North Africa to China, providing invaluable ethnographic and geographical observations. Art and architecture. Art during the Abbasid period reflected both Islamic principles and the cultural diversity of the empire. Calligraphy, elevated to the highest art form, especially for copying the Quran. Styles like Kufic script adorned manuscripts and buildings. Illumination, manuscripts were decorated with geometric patterns, vegetal motifs, and gold leaf, reflecting the Islamic prohibition against figural imagery in religious contexts. Architecture, Abbasid buildings emphasized grandeur and function, from the Great Mosque of Samarra with its spiraling minaret to the palatial complexes along the Tigris. Music and poetry. Music thrived in the Abbasid courts, blending Arab, Persian, Greek, and Indian influences. Musicians like Ishaq al-Mawsili composed and taught complex modes, maqamat, while poetry evolved into a refined art of love, satire, and moral reflection. The transmission to Europe. From the 10th century onward, many Arabic works began to be translated into Latin in centers like Toledo and Sicily. The mathematical, medical, and philosophical knowledge of the Islamic Golden Age became the backbone of Europe's own intellectual revival, the Renaissance. Arabic numerals replaced cumbersome Roman ones, surgical techniques from al-Zarawi were practiced in European hospitals, and the philosophical works of Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina became essential texts at European universities. The decline of the Golden Age. By the 11th century, political fragmentation and shifting trade routes began to weaken the Abbasid center. The Mongol invasion in 1258 CE and the sack of Baghdad would deliver a devastating blow, scattering scholars and destroying the House of Wisdom. Yet the intellectual seeds planted during the Golden Age continued to bear fruit for centuries, in lands far beyond Baghdad. Part 14, The Crusades and the Muslim Response. Salah al-Din and the Struggle for the Holy Land. By the late 11th century, the unity and power of the Islamic world that had shone so brightly under the Abbasid Golden Age was beginning to fracture. The Abbasid caliphs still reigned in Baghdad, but their authority was largely symbolic. Real power lay in the hands of regional rulers, sultans, emirs, and military commanders, many of them of Turkic or Persian origin. The fragmentation of political authority across the Muslim world created both opportunity and danger. On the western edges of the Mediterranean, Muslim rule in Al-Andalus was being challenged by Christian kingdoms in Spain. In the east, the Byzantine Empire, though weakened, still held key territories in Anatolia and the Levant. It was from this complex political landscape that the Crusades would emerge, a series of wars launched from Europe, justified as holy campaigns, but driven by a mix of religious fervor, political ambition, and economic desire. The road to the First Crusade. In 1071 CE, the Battle of Manzikert saw the Byzantine army defeated by the Seljuk Turks, a Sunni Muslim dynasty that had recently embraced Islam and gained control over much of Anatolia. This loss opened the door for Turkish settlement deep into formerly Byzantine lands. Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, facing the loss of his empire's heartlands, appealed to Western Europe for military assistance. His call found a willing ear in Pope Urban II, who in 1095 CE addressed the Council of Clermont. The Pope called for Christian knights to march east, liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule, and aid the Byzantine Empire. Urban's speech electrified his audience. The promise of spiritual reward, complete forgiveness of sins, combined with the lure of adventure, land, and wealth drew thousands to take up the cross. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. The First Crusade began chaotically with the so-called People's Crusade. An ill-equipped mob of peasants and minor knights who were largely wiped out in Anatolia. But the main Crusader armies, led by European nobles, followed soon after in a more organized campaign. At the time, the Muslim world was divided. The Seljuk Turks controlled large portions of Anatolia and Syria but were themselves split into rival principalities. Egypt and parts of Palestine were under the Shura Fatimid Caliphate, rivals of the Seljuks. This disunity allowed the Crusaders to pick off territories one by one. In 1099, they reached Jerusalem, which had recently been retaken by the Fatimids from the Seljuks. The siege lasted weeks. When the Crusaders breached the walls, they carried out a massacre, killing thousands of Muslims and Jews. Chroniclers speak of blood in the streets and the near-total slaughter of the city's defenders and inhabitants. The Crusaders established several states in the Levant. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa. These Latin Christian states would last for decades, sustained by reinforcements and trade with Europe. The Muslim response. The shock of Jerusalem's fall reverberated across the Muslim world. Poets and preachers in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo called for jihad, not merely as a religious duty, but as a matter of honor. Yet the deep divisions between Seljuks, Fatimids, and other rulers hindered a coordinated response. Over time, however, new leaders began to emerge who recognized that unity was essential for confronting the Crusader threat. Zengi and the First Counterattack. In the 1120s and 1130s, Imad al-Din Zengi, governor of Mosul and later Aleppo, began consolidating power in northern Syria. A skilled and ambitious leader, Zengi understood that fighting the Crusaders required not only military skill but also the political unification of Muslim territories. In 1144, Zengi captured the county of Edessa, the first of the Crusader states to fall. This victory electrified the Muslim world and alarmed Europe, triggering the Second Crusade. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149. Led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, the Second Crusade aimed to retake Edessa. But poor coordination, logistical failures, and effective Muslim resistance led to disaster. The Crusaders failed to regain Edessa and suffered heavy losses, especially during their ill-fated siege of Damascus in 1148. The Second Crusade's failure boosted Muslim morale and strengthened the position of Zengi's successors. Nur al-Din and the rise of Salah al-Din. After Zengi's death in 1146, his son Nur al-Din inherited Aleppo and later took control of Damascus, uniting much of Syria under his leadership. Nur al-Din was a devout Sunni Muslim who promoted jihad against the Crusaders and patronized religious and educational institutions. One of his generals in Egypt, Shirkuh, brought along a young nephew. Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, better known in the West as Saladin. Saladin's rise was rapid. After Shirkuh's death in 1169, Saladin became vizier of Egypt under the nominal authority of the Fatimid Caliph. When the last Fatimid Caliph died in 1171, Saladin restored Egypt to Sunni rule under the Abbasid Caliph's nominal suzerainty, ending centuries of Fatimid Shura dominance. Saladin's vision. Saladin combined military skill with political patience. His ultimate goal was to unite Egypt and Syria under his command before confronting the Crusaders head-on. Over the next decade, he maneuvered carefully, consolidating his power, building alliances, and avoiding reckless engagements. He also cultivated an image of piety and chivalry, enforcing justice in his domains and earning the respect of both Muslims and some of his Christian adversaries. The Battle of Hattin and the recapture of Jerusalem, 1187. The turning point came in 1187. The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, under King Guy of Lusignan, broke a truce by raiding Muslim caravans. Saladin responded by mobilizing his forces. The two armies met near the Horns of Hattin in Galilee. Saladin's forces surrounded the Crusaders, cutting them off from water under the blazing summer sun. After a day of withering heat and constant harassment, the Crusader army collapsed. King Guy and many nobles were captured. The relic of the True Cross was seized. With the Crusader military broken, Saladin advanced on Jerusalem. After a brief siege, the city surrendered. In stark contrast to the massacre of 1099, Saladin allowed most inhabitants to leave peacefully upon payment of ransom, and many were spared even without payment. The recovery of Jerusalem was celebrated across the Muslim world as a triumph of faith and unity. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192. Jerusalem's fall shocked Europe and led to the Third Crusade, led by three of the most famous monarchs of the era. Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart. Philip II of France. Frederick I Barbarossa, Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick drowned en route, and Philip returned to France after capturing Acre, leaving Richard and Saladin as the main opponents. The Third Crusade was a series of hard-fought battles and sieges, most notably at Acre and Arsuf. Richard won military victories but failed to recapture Jerusalem. In 1192, Saladin and Richard agreed to a truce. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed access to the holy sites. Saladin's death and legacy. Saladin died in 1193 in Damascus, leaving behind a reputation for both military brilliance and personal honor. He had given away much of his wealth in charity, and at his death, his treasury was nearly empty. In the Muslim world, he was remembered as the leader who reclaimed Jerusalem and embodied the virtues of justice, generosity, and faith. In the West, even among his enemies, he was respected as a model of chivalry. After Saladin's empire, the Ayyubid dynasty, was divided among his relatives, and internal disputes soon weakened it. While later crusades would come, the momentum had shifted. The Muslim world had proven capable of uniting to defend its lands when inspired by strong leadership and a shared cause. The Crusades themselves, stretching over 2 centuries, left deep marks on both the Islamic and Christian worlds, scars of war, but also a legacy of cultural exchange in trade, technology, and knowledge. Part 15: The Mongol Invasion, the Fall of Baghdad, and the Mamluk Resistance. The early 13th century brought to the Islamic world a force unlike any it had faced before. The Crusaders had been formidable, but they were limited in number, dependent on supplies from Europe, and vulnerable to counterattack. The Mongols, by contrast, were a tidal wave, vast in number, unmatched in mobility, and terrifying in their relentlessness. Emerging from the steppes of Central Asia under the leadership of Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan, the Mongols forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Their conquests would engulf much of Asia, and in the process, they would shatter the heart of the Islamic world. The Mongol world before the Islamic confrontation. The Mongols were originally a collection of nomadic tribes in Mongolia, skilled in horsemanship, archery, and survival in harsh climates. Genghis Khan united these tribes in the early 1200s through diplomacy, strategic marriages, and ruthless elimination of rivals. Once united, the Mongols turned outward. They were not driven by religious fervor like the Crusaders, but by pragmatic goals, securing trade routes, gaining tribute, and expanding power. They prized loyalty above all else, often sparing those who submitted and obliterating those who resisted. The Mongol armies were highly organized, with a decimal system dividing forces into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Each soldier carried multiple horses, allowing for incredible speed over long distances. Communication was maintained through relay riders who could cover vast distances in days. The first Mongol contact with the Islamic world. The first major clash came in 1218 to 1221, when the Mongols advanced into the Khwarezmian Empire, a Muslim state stretching across Central Asia. The conflict began with a disastrous diplomatic incident. Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian city of Otrar. The governor, suspecting the caravan of espionage, seized it and executed its members. Genghis Khan, seeking redress, sent envoys to the Khwarezmian ruler, Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad. The Shah not only refused to punish the governor but executed one of the envoys. This insult unleashed the Mongol fury. From 1219 to 1221, Mongol forces swept through the Khwarezmian lands, destroying cities such as Bokhara, Samarkand, and Urgench. Those who resisted were massacred. Those who surrendered were often spared but heavily taxed. The destruction was so complete that entire regions were depopulated. Survivors fled westward, bringing tales of Mongol cruelty that spread terror ahead of them. The Mongol advance into Persia and Mesopotamia. Following Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire was divided among his sons, but expansion continued. In the mid-13th century, the empire's southwestern thrust was led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, under orders from the great Khan monk. Hulagu's mission was explicit. Destroy the assassins, the Nizari Ismaili sect controlling mountain fortresses in Persia. Subdue the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Push into Syria and, if possible, Egypt. By 1256, Hulagu had eliminated the assassins, capturing their strongholds and executing their leaders. His next target was the jewel of the Islamic world, Baghdad. The fall of Baghdad, 1258. Baghdad, founded in the 8th century by the Abbasid caliphs, had been the beating heart of the Islamic Golden Age, a center of learning, culture, and governance. By the mid-13th century, however, the Abbasid Caliphate was a shadow of its former self, with real political authority fragmented among regional rulers. Still, the symbolic weight of Baghdad was immense. Hulagu approached Baghdad with an army that may have numbered 100,000, including engineers, siege experts, and auxiliary forces from subject peoples. The Caliph al-Mustasim, underestimating the Mongol threat, refused to submit or prepare adequately for defense. In January 1258, the Mongols encircled the city. Siege engines bombarded the walls, and after less than 2 weeks, breaches were made. The defenders were overwhelmed, and on February 10, the city surrendered. What followed was one of the most infamous massacres in medieval history. The caliph was executed, allegedly rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses to avoid spilling royal blood. Libraries, including the House of Wisdom, were destroyed. Some accounts, perhaps exaggerated, claim that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that its waters ran black with ink. Estimates of the dead range from tens of thousands to over 200,000. The destruction of Baghdad was not merely a military defeat. It was a cultural catastrophe. The city that had once symbolized the intellectual and spiritual heart of the Islamic world was left in ruins. The Mongols push west. After Baghdad, Hulagu moved into Syria, capturing Aleppo and Damascus with relative ease. The Muslim rulers of the region, many still divided by internal rivalries, could do little to resist. It seemed that nothing stood between the Mongols and total dominance of the Middle East. Yet fate intervened. In 1259, the great Khan monk died in the Mongol capital of Karakoram. Hulagu withdrew much of his army to participate in the succession dispute, leaving a smaller force in Syria. It was at this moment that a new power in the Islamic world would rise to meet them, the Mamluks of Egypt. The Mamluk Sultanate. The Mamluks were originally slave soldiers, mostly of Turkic and Circassian origin, purchased as boys, converted to Islam, and trained in the arts of war. Over time, they became a powerful military caste, often serving as the backbone of the armies of Muslim rulers. In Egypt, the Mamluks overthrew the Ayyubid dynasty in 1250, establishing their own sultanate. By 1260, The Mamluks were led by Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant general Baybars. The Battle of Ain Jalut, 1260. The Mongols, now under the command of Kitbuka, advanced into Palestine, capturing Gaza. Their next target was Egypt. Qutuz and Baybars, recognizing the existential threat, marched out to meet them. The two armies met at Ain Jalut in the Jezreel Valley. The Mamluks employed tactics the Mongols rarely faced. They used mobility and feigned retreat to lure the Mongol cavalry into a trap. When the Mongols pursued, hidden Mamluk forces attacked from the flanks. The result was a decisive Mamluk victory. Kitbuka was captured and executed. This was the first major defeat the Mongols had suffered in open battle, shattering their aura of invincibility. The significance of Ain Jalut. The victory at Ain Jalut had profound consequences. It halted the Mongol advance into North Africa. It preserved Egypt, and with it, a base of Muslim power, from Mongol domination. It elevated the Mamluks as the preeminent defenders of the Islamic world. Baybars would later become sultan and lead campaigns to consolidate Muslim control over Syria and drive the remaining Crusader states into decline. The Mongols and Islam. In the decades after Ain Jalut, the Mongols retained control over Persia and parts of Iraq, ruling as the Ilkhanate. Initially, they were religiously tolerant but often hostile toward Islam, favoring Buddhism and Nestorian Christianity among their ruling elite. However, over time, Mongol rulers in Persia converted to Islam, integrating themselves into the cultural and political fabric of the region. By the end of the 13th century, the Ilkhanate was a Muslim state, albeit one that never fully regained the centralized brilliance of the Abbasid era. A new Islamic power structure. The Mamluk Sultanate emerged from the Mongol crisis as the most powerful Muslim state in the eastern Mediterranean. From their capital in Cairo, the Mamluks defeated the last Crusader strongholds in 1291, ending the Crusader era in the Levant. Preserved the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Positioned themselves as the champions of Sunni Islam. Yet the scars of the Mongol invasions remained. Baghdad never regained its former prominence, and the fragmentation of the Islamic world persisted. Part 16: The Rise of the Ottoman Empire and the End of the Crusader and Mongol Threats. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Islamic world was still feeling the deep aftershocks of the Mongol invasions and the centuries-long crusades. The Abbasid Caliphate, though symbolically re-established in Cairo under Mamluk protection, was a shadow of its former glory. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate had fragmented. The Mongols in Persia, the Ilkhanate, had converted to Islam but were plagued by internal strife. Out of this fractured political landscape, a new force began to rise from the northwestern frontiers of Anatolia. At first, it seemed a small and insignificant principality among many Turkish beyliks that had sprung up in the vacuum left by the decline of the Seljuks. Yet within little more than a century, this state would transform into one of the most powerful empires in history, the Ottoman Empire. Anatolia after the Mongols. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks had swept into Anatolia after their victory over the Byzantines at Manzikert, 1071. They established the Sultanate of Rum, ruling much of central Anatolia. But Mongol invasions in the 13th century reduced the Seljuks to vassals, and the Sultanate eventually disintegrated into a patchwork of small, independent beyliks. These beyliks, semi-independent principalities, often fought each other as much as they fought their Christian neighbors. But some, located along the Byzantine frontier, became especially warlike. Their leaders were known as Ghazis, warriors of the faith, engaged in both religiously framed and opportunistic raids against non-Muslim territories. The origins of the Ottomans. Among these beyliks was the small domain of Osman I, from whom the Ottomans take their name. Osman, a leader of probable Turkic nomadic background, began his rule around 1299 in the region of Sagat in northwestern Anatolia. Osman's principality was modest in size and resources. Yet he was well positioned. His territory bordered the weakening Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans, like other Ghazi states, could expand into Christian lands without provoking the wrath of more powerful Muslim neighbors. This location allowed Osman to attract warriors eager for plunder and religious merit. Ottoman expansion in its earliest days relied on several key factors. Gaza ideology, portraying their wars as part of the struggle for Islam against non-believers. Flexibility and pragmatism, alliances and truces with both Muslim and Christian neighbors when convenient. Incorporation of conquered peoples, rather than mass expulsion, the Ottomans absorbed Christians into their realm, sometimes even retaining local leaders in positions of authority. Orhan and the capture of Bursa. Osman's son Orhan succeeded him around 1324 and began transforming the Ottomans from a loose tribal confederation into a more organized state. Orhan introduced coinage, established a standing army, and began capturing major Byzantine towns. In 1326, Orhan captured Bursa, which became the first major Ottoman capital. Bursa's location in northwestern Anatolia gave the Ottomans both a political center and a base for further expansion into the Balkans. During Orhan's reign, the Ottomans crossed into Europe for the first time, taking advantage of Byzantine civil wars to secure footholds in Thrace. They developed the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force recruited initially from Christian captives converted to Islam, later institutionalized through the Devşirme system, levy of Christian boys. The decline of the Crusader presence. By the mid-14th century, the Crusader states in the Levant had been reduced to a handful of coastal strongholds, thanks largely to the Mamluks of Egypt. In 1291, the Mamluks had captured Acre, the last major Crusader city in the Holy Land. While later crusades would be called, such as those to aid Christian states in Cyprus or to defend against the Ottomans in the Balkans. The era of permanent Crusader kingdoms in the East was over. Crusading fervor did not disappear entirely, but its focus shifted. Defending Christian lands in the Balkans from Ottoman advance. Naval campaigns against Muslim powers in the Mediterranean. Protecting European trade routes against Muslim corsairs. In other words, the Islamic world no longer faced a united, long-term European presence in its core territories. Instead, the new Christian-Muslim conflict zone moved north and west, into southeastern Europe. The end of Mongol power in the Islamic world. While the Ottomans expanded in the west, the Mongol Ilkhanate in Persia began to fragment after the death of its ruler Abu Sa'idi in 1335. Internal disputes, combined with the rise of new powers such as the Timurids in Central Asia, eroded Mongol control. By the late 14th century, Mongol rule as a unified force in the Middle East had ended. This vacuum in Persia allowed the rise of successor states, some of which, like the Timurids, would clash with the Ottomans later. But crucially, the collapse of Mongol authority meant the Islamic world no longer faced the overwhelming eastward threat that had once obliterated Baghdad. Murad I and expansion into the Balkans. Orhan's son, Murad I, R. 1362–1389, took Ottoman expansion into high gear. Under his rule, the Ottomans moved their capital from Bursa to Edirne, Adrianople, in Thrace, signifying their shift toward a Balkan-centered empire. They absorbed much of Thrace and Macedonia, often using vassalage arrangements with local Christian rulers. Murad established the Devşirme system formally, creating a steady supply of loyal Janissary troops. Murad's reign culminated in the Battle of Kosovo, 1389, where the Ottomans faced a coalition of Serbian and other Balkan forces. Although Murad himself was killed during or shortly after the battle, the Ottomans emerged victorious, cementing their dominance in the region. Bayezid I and the Ottoman crisis. Murad's son Bayezid I, nicknamed Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, expanded Ottoman control deeper into the Balkans and Anatolia. He also besieged Constantinople, bringing the Byzantine capital to the brink of collapse decades before its actual fall. However, Bayezid's ambitions were cut short by the arrival of a new conqueror, Timur, Tamerlane. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Timur decisively defeated Bayezid, capturing him and plunging the Ottoman state into a decade-long civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum. The recovery in Mehmed I. After years of fratricidal struggle, Mehmed I emerged as Sultan in 1413, reuniting the empire. He restored stability, repaired alliances, and prepared the way for renewed expansion. Murad II and the Final Crusades. Murad II, r. 1421 to 1451, faced repeated Christian coalitions seeking to push the Ottomans out of Europe. One of the last major crusading efforts in the Balkans was the Crusade of Varna, 1444, which ended in a decisive Ottoman victory. Another was the Second Battle of Kosovo, 1448, which further cemented Ottoman control. These defeats effectively ended the idea of large-scale European crusades into Ottoman lands. While smaller campaigns would occur, the era of massed pan-European armies marching east under the cross had come to an end. The stage set for a new era. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans stood as the dominant power in southeastern Europe and much of Anatolia. The Crusader threat had receded, the Mongols were gone as a unified force, and the Mamluks remained strong but increasingly inward-focused. The stage was set for the defining moment of Ottoman history, the conquest of Constantinople in 1453 by Mehmed II, which would mark not only the transformation of the Byzantine capital into Istanbul but also a symbolic shift in world history. Part 17, The Fall of Constantinople and the Transformation of the Islamic World. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood as one of the world's great cities. Founded by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great in 330 CE as the new capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, it had endured sieges, plagues, and wars. It was the gateway between Europe and Asia, commanding the Bosporus Strait, and it was one of the most fortified cities on earth. For centuries, Muslim armies had gazed at its massive walls with ambition. The Prophet Muhammad himself was reported to have spoken of the city's eventual conquest, a prophecy that inspired generations of Muslim rulers to attempt it. Yet every effort, from the early Arab sieges of the 7th and 8th centuries to the campaigns of the Seljuk Turks, had failed. The city's massive triple walls, formidable navy, and strategic geography had made it almost impregnable. By the mid-15th century, however, the situation had changed. The Byzantine Empire, once a sprawling Mediterranean power, had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a few surrounding territories. The Ottomans, now the dominant force in the region, surrounded the city on all sides. The man who would finally succeed where so many had failed was Mehmed II, later known as Fatih Sultan Mehmed, Mehmed the Conqueror. Mehmed II and his vision. Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne in 1451 at the age of 19, following the death of his father, Murad II. Young though he was, Mehmed was ambitious, intelligent, and determined. He understood the symbolic and strategic importance of Constantinople. Strategically, controlling the city meant controlling trade between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Politically, it would cement Ottoman dominance over both Europe and Asia. Religiously, it would fulfill the long-cherished Muslim goal of bringing Constantinople into the Islamic world. Mehmed was also a shrewd planner. Before launching his campaign, he secured peace treaties with Hungary and Venice to avoid distractions from other fronts. He also prepared his army and navy for what would be one of the most ambitious sieges in medieval history. Preparations for the siege. The Ottomans had attempted to blockade Constantinople before, but the city's access to the sea had always allowed it to be resupplied. Mehmed planned to cut off the city completely, both by land and water. Construction of Rumeli Hisari. In 1452, Mehmed ordered the construction of Rumeli Hisari, the fortress of Europe, on the Bosporus, directly across from the older Anadolu Hisari fortress built by his great-grandfather Bayezid I. This allowed the Ottomans to control all shipping entering or leaving the city by sea from the Black Sea. The Great Cannon. Mehmed commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Orban to build massive siege cannons, the largest of which could fire stone balls weighing over half a ton. These cannons were designed to batter down the formidable Theodosian walls that had protected the city for centuries. Naval expansion. Mehmed expanded the Ottoman navy to about 120 ships, including galleys and transports. This fleet would blockade the city from the sea while the land army besieged it. The defenders. By 1453, Constantinople's population had dwindled to perhaps 50,000 to 80,000 people, a fraction of its former size. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos commanded the defense, supported by around 7,000 to 10,000 soldiers, including 700 Genoese mercenaries led by Giovanni Giustiniani, a skilled commander. The defenders relied on the city's massive triple walls and a giant chain stretched across the Golden Horn to block enemy ships from entering the inner harbor. The siege begins. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed's forces, numbering perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 men, surrounded Constantinople. The siege unfolded in several phases. Artillery bombardment. Mehmed's massive cannons opened fire, shaking the walls but not immediately breaching them. The Theodosian walls had withstood sieges for centuries, and the defenders worked tirelessly to repair damage under fire. Naval maneuvers. The Ottoman fleet failed to break the chain across the Golden Horn in direct attacks. But in one of the most audacious moves of the siege, Mehmed ordered ships to be hauled overland on greased logs, bypassing the chain and launching them directly into the Golden Horn. This gave the Ottomans a naval presence inside the harbor. Repeated assaults. The Ottomans launched multiple frontal assaults, testing different sections of the walls. The defenders repelled each with fierce resistance, but their resources were stretched thin. The final assault. After weeks of bombardment and probing attacks, Mehmed ordered a final, massive assault on May 29, 1453. The attack began before dawn. First wave, irregular troops, Bashi-bazouks, attacked to wear down the defenders. Second wave, Anatolian troops pressed the attack, forcing the defenders to exhaust ammunition and energy. Third wave, the elite Janissaries advanced in disciplined formations, focusing on weakened points in the walls. In the chaos of battle, Giovanni Giustiniani was gravely wounded and evacuated, which dealt a severe blow to defender morale. At a breach near the gate of St. Romanus, Ottoman forces broke through, raising their banners atop the walls. The fall of the city. By mid-morning, Ottoman troops were flooding into Constantinople. Emperor Constantine XI is said to have thrown off his imperial regalia and fought to the death in the streets. Mehmed entered the city in the afternoon. He ordered that the Hagia Sophia, the city's greatest church, be converted into a mosque, a symbol of the city's transformation. However, he also took steps to repopulate and rebuild the city, inviting Muslims, Christians, and Jews to settle there. The significance of the conquest. The fall of Constantinople was a turning point in world history. End of the Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of the Eastern Roman Empire was gone. Transformation into Istanbul, the city became the Ottoman capital, Istanbul, and the heart of a vast Islamic empire. Shift in trade routes, control of the Bosporus and Eastern Mediterranean trade spurred European powers to seek alternative routes to Asia, indirectly leading to the age of exploration. Symbolic fulfillment. For Muslims, the conquest was the long-awaited fulfillment of the Prophet's prophecy. Mehmed II's legacy. Mehmed II was not just a conqueror but also a builder and statesman. He strengthened Istanbul's defenses and infrastructure, sponsored architecture, including the construction of the Topkapi Palace, reorganized the empire's administration to integrate its diverse populations, encouraged scholarship, science, and art, making Istanbul a major cultural hub. Under his reign, the Ottomans expanded further into the Balkans, Crimea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The Islamic world after 1453. The conquest of Constantinople had ripple effects across the Islamic world. The Ottomans became the undisputed leaders of Sunni Islam, rivaling the Mamluks in prestige. Muslim trade and cultural influence expanded deeper into Europe. The symbolic unity of the Islamic world was strengthened, even though politically it remained divided into several major empires. In Europe, the loss of Constantinople was a shock that accelerated maritime exploration, setting the stage for new global encounters between the Islamic world and emerging European colonial powers. Part 18, The Height of Ottoman Power, Suleiman the Magnificent and the global reach of Islam. By the early 16th century, the Ottoman Empire stood as the preeminent power in the Muslim world, with its capital, Istanbul, radiating wealth, learning, and political influence across 3 continents. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 had propelled the Ottomans into the front rank of global powers. Under Mehmed II and his successors, they expanded their dominions deep into Europe, across the Middle East, and along the North African coast. But it was under Suleiman I, known in the Islamic world as Suleiman the Lawgiver, Kanuni Sultan Suleiman, and in Europe as Suleiman the Magnificent, that the empire reached its zenith in territorial extent, political power, and cultural brilliance. The world before Suleiman. Before Suleiman ascended the throne in 1520, the Ottoman Empire had already undergone dramatic expansion. Bayezid II had consolidated power internally and avoided overextension in foreign wars. Selim I, Suleiman's father, had transformed the empire's position in the Islamic world by defeating the Mamluks of Egypt, 1516 to 1517, bringing the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman control, and extending Ottoman rule into the Levant and Arabia. This victory over the Mamluks also brought the symbolic leadership of the Muslim world, the Caliphate, into Ottoman hands, though the Ottomans would only gradually emphasize this role. By 1520, the empire spanned much of southeastern Europe, including Greece, Serbia, and parts of Hungary, Anatolia in its entirety, the Levant, Egypt, and the Arabian coastlines, territories in North Africa, extending toward modern-day Algeria. The rise of Suleiman. Born in 1494 in Trabzon, on the Black Sea coast, Suleiman was well educated in history, literature, theology, and the arts of statecraft. He became sultan at the age of 26, inheriting a vast and well-organized realm, but also one with constant military and diplomatic challenges on multiple fronts. From the start, Suleiman was determined to expand Ottoman power further into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Strengthen the empire's legal and administrative systems. Patronize arts, architecture, and scholarship to make Istanbul a center of Islamic civilization. Military campaigns in Europe. Suleiman's early reign saw a series of dramatic victories against European powers. Belgrade, 1521. The fortress city of Belgrade was the gateway to Hungary and Central Europe. It had resisted Ottoman conquest for decades, but Suleiman captured it in 1521, opening the way for further campaigns. Rhodes, 1522. The island of Rhodes was held by the Knights Hospitaller, a Christian military order that harassed Muslim shipping. Suleiman besieged the island for months before securing its surrender, ending the Knights' stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean. Battle of Mohacs, 1526. Perhaps Suleiman's most famous victory in Europe, Mohacs saw the annihilation of the Hungarian army and the death of King Louis II. This battle shattered the Kingdom of Hungary, allowing the Ottomans to dominate most of it and threaten Habsburg Austria directly. Siege of Vienna, 1529. In a bold move, Suleiman marched on Vienna, the Habsburg capital. Although the siege failed due to weather, supply issues, and strong defenses, it marked the high-water mark of Ottoman expansion into Central Europe and sent shockwaves through Christendom. Campaigns in the Middle East. While Suleiman is often remembered for his European campaigns, his reign also saw decisive action in the Islamic heartlands. Conflict with the Safavids. In the east, the Ottomans faced the Safavid Empire of Persia, a Shia Muslim dynasty that challenged Ottoman authority and religious legitimacy. The rivalry between the Sunni Ottomans and Shia Safavids was as much about ideology as territory. Suleiman launched multiple campaigns against the Safavids, securing control over much of Iraq and stabilizing the eastern frontier. The Treaty of Amasya, 1555, formalized the borders between the two empires. Naval power in the Mediterranean. Suleiman also recognized the importance of naval dominance. Under his rule, the legendary Admiral Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha led the Ottoman fleet to victories across the Mediterranean, challenging Spanish and Venetian power. The Ottomans allied with France against their common enemy, the Habsburgs, an unusual Christian-Muslim alliance in the 16th century. Ottoman naval influence extended into the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, countering Portuguese expansion and protecting Muslim trade routes. Lawgiver and reformer. Suleiman was not only a conqueror, he was also a reformer who sought to harmonize Islamic law, Sharia, with the empire's customary laws, canon. His legal reforms covered land ownership and taxation systems, criminal justice, standardizing punishments across provinces, trade regulations, ensuring fair commercial practices, religious tolerance within the millet system, which allowed Christians and Jews to govern their own communities under Ottoman oversight. These reforms enhanced the stability of a vast and diverse empire, earning him his title, Kanuni, the lawgiver, patron of arts and architecture. Under Suleiman's patronage, the Ottoman Empire experienced a cultural flowering. The architect Mimar Sinan designed some of the most iconic mosques and buildings in Istanbul, including the Süleymaniye Mosque, which still dominates the city's skyline. Poetry, calligraphy, and manuscript illumination flourished. Istanbul became a magnet for scholars from across the Muslim world, as well as from Europe. The global reach of Islam. By the mid-16th century, Islam under Ottoman influence was a truly global force. Africa, Islam spread further into the Sahel, supported by trade networks linked to North Africa and the Ottoman world. Asia, Muslim traders and scholars from the Ottoman and Mughal realms interacted with Southeast Asia, influencing Islam in places like Malacca and Aceh. Europe. Large Muslim populations lived under Ottoman rule in the Balkans, coexisting with Christian communities in a unique imperial system. Suleiman's legacy. When Suleiman died in 1566, the Ottoman Empire was at its territorial height, spanning from Hungary to Yemen, and from Algiers to Baghdad, controlling the holy cities of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, commanding key trade routes between Europe, Africa, and Asia. His reign marked the peak of Ottoman influence in the Islamic world and on the global stage. While challenges lay ahead, including rising European naval power and internal strains, the empire's prestige during this era was unmatched. Part 19, The Shifting Balance of Power, Ottoman Decline, Safavid Resurgence, and the Rise of the Mughals. The 17th century was a century of change for the Islamic world. The three great Muslim empires of the early modern era, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire, dominated vast territories and diverse peoples. Together, they ruled over millions, controlled some of the most prosperous trade routes in the world, and oversaw a remarkable flowering of art, science, and architecture. Yet this was also a century in which the balance of power began to shift. The Ottomans, despite their immense reach, faced mounting internal and external challenges. The Safavids, their rivals in Persia, experienced both a political revival and growing pressures from within. Meanwhile, in South Asia, the Mughals reached their zenith under emperors like Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, even as seeds of future instability were sown. The Ottoman Empire in the 17th century. At the dawn of the 1600s, the Ottoman Empire remained the largest and most powerful Muslim state in the world. Its dominion stretched from the gates of Vienna in Europe to the deserts of Arabia, and from the Maghreb in North Africa to the mountains of the Caucasus. However, several factors began to strain the empire's foundations. Military stalemates. In Europe, the Ottomans faced stiff resistance from the Habsburgs, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Russian expansion to the north. The Long Turkish War, 1593–1606, with the Habsburgs drained Ottoman resources and ended with no decisive territorial gains. Naval dominance in the Mediterranean began to erode in the face of rising European maritime powers like Spain, Portugal, and later the Dutch and English. Economic strains. European control of sea routes around Africa undermined the Ottoman role as middlemen in the spice trade. Inflation, fueled by the influx of silver from the Americas into Europe and then the Ottoman economy, destabilized prices. Corruption in provincial administration weakened revenue collection. The Janissaries and internal politics. The once elite Janissary Corps, the backbone of Ottoman military might, became increasingly politicized. Their involvement in palace intrigues and resistance to reform created instability. Sultans, often secluded in the palace, relied heavily on court officials and viziers, shifting real power away from the throne. The Safavid resurgence. The Safavid Empire in Persia had been a rival to the Ottomans since its foundation in the early 16th century. Founded by Shah Ismail I as a Shia Muslim dynasty, the Safavids had clashed repeatedly with the Sunni Ottomans over territory and religious legitimacy. By the early 1600s, the Safavids had experienced internal weaknesses and territorial losses, but the reign of Shah Abbas I, 1588–1629, transformed their fortunes. Shah Abbas the Great. Military reforms. Abbas restructured the army, reducing reliance on tribal forces and creating a standing army equipped with modern firearms, often with the help of European military advisors. Economic development. He moved the capital to Isfahan, turning it into one of the most beautiful cities in the world, with grand boulevards, mosques, gardens, and bazaars. Diplomacy. Abbas fostered trade with Europe, particularly with England and the Dutch, using Persian Gulf ports to bypass Ottoman-controlled routes. Territorial gains. He regained lost lands in the Caucasus and Iraq, temporarily reversing Ottoman advances. After Abbas, however, Safavid leadership weakened. Subsequent rulers lacked his vision and ability, leading to a gradual decline by the late 17th century. The rise of the Mughal Empire. While the Ottomans and Safavids contested the Middle East, the Mughal Empire in India emerged as a powerful force in the Islamic world. Founded in 1526 by Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, the Mughals had steadily expanded their control over the Indian subcontinent. The 17th century marked the height of Mughal power under Emperor Akbar, r. 1556–1605, and his successors. Akbar the Great. Akbar's reign was a turning point in Mughal history. Religious policy. He pursued a policy of tolerance toward Hindus, abolishing the jizya, non-Muslim tax, and inviting scholars of various faiths to his court. Administrative reforms. Akbar introduced a centralized bureaucracy and land revenue system that strengthened imperial control. Cultural flourishing. His court became a center for Persian art, architecture, and literature, blending Islamic and Indian traditions. Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Jahangir, r. 1605–1627, continued Akbar's policies but faced challenges from regional rebellions and court intrigues. Shah Jahan, r. 1628–1658, presided over the empire's cultural zenith, commissioning masterpieces like the Taj Mahal, a symbol of Mughal architectural genius. Trade and cultural exchange. All three empires participated in a global network of trade linking Europe, Africa, and Asia. Ottomans controlled the eastern Mediterranean and key overland routes to Asia. Safavids served as intermediaries in silk trade between Asia and Europe. Mughals exported textiles, spices, and precious stones, attracting European trading companies. Islamic cities from Istanbul to Isfahan to Agra thrived as centers of art, scholarship, and craftsmanship. Religious and cultural interactions. The 17th century saw complex religious dynamics within the Islamic world. The Sunni-Shia divide remained a major fault line, especially between the Ottomans and Safavids. Sufi orders played a significant role in spreading Islam in Africa and Asia, often blending local traditions with Islamic teachings. Scholarship flourished, with advancements in astronomy, medicine, and theology. Signs of change. While the Islamic empires remained formidable in the 1600s, underlying challenges were beginning to erode their dominance. The rise of European maritime empires shifted global trade away from overland Islamic-controlled routes. Internal court politics and succession struggles weakened central authority. The cost of maintaining large armies and bureaucracies strained finances. By the century's end, the stage was set for a new era in which European colonial powers would increasingly challenge the political and economic supremacy of the Muslim world. Part 20: The Modern Muslim World, Colonialism, Reform, and the Global Ummah. The 18th century opened with the Muslim world still under the authority of three great empires: the Ottomans in the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe, the Safavids in Persia, and the Mughals in the Indian subcontinent. They commanded vast populations, rich agricultural lands, and dynamic trading cities. Islam was not just a religion, it was the framework for governance, law, and culture across continents. Yet beneath the surface, the balance of power was shifting. The European maritime powers, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal, and later Germany and Italy, were growing in strength, wealth, and technological innovation. Their ships plied the seas with speed and efficiency, their armies wielded increasingly advanced firearms, and their merchants carved out lucrative colonies and trade monopolies across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. For the Muslim empires, this changing world order would bring both unprecedented challenges and profound transformations. The waning of the great empires. The Ottoman Empire. By the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire had already endured a series of military setbacks. The failure to capture Vienna in 1683 marked the end of large-scale Ottoman expansion into Europe. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 forced the Ottomans to cede significant territories to Austria, Poland, and Venice. Throughout the 1700s and 1800s, military defeats against Russia, Austria, and other European powers eroded Ottoman territory. Economic dependency on European goods and credit weakened domestic industries. Internal unrest among diverse ethnic and religious groups, Greeks, Armenians, Arabs, Slavs, threatened unity. Attempts at modernization, known as the Tanzimat reforms in the 19th century, sought to reorganize the military, legal systems, and administration along European lines. While these reforms improved infrastructure and standardized governance, they could not reverse the empire's political fragmentation. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was referred to as the Sickman of Europe. The First World War would bring its final collapse. The Safavid and successor states. The Safavid Empire fell in 1722 to Afghan invaders, and Persia entered a turbulent era of shifting dynasties. Eventually, the Qajar dynasty rose to power in the late 18th century, ruling a Persia increasingly pressured by both Russian and British ambitions. Throughout the 19th century, Russia seized Persian territories in the Caucasus. Britain sought influence over the Persian Gulf to protect its route to India. Persian sovereignty was undermined by foreign concessions over oil, trade, and infrastructure. The Mughal Empire. In India, the Mughal Empire, once the jewel of the Islamic world, began to fragment in the 18th century. Regional kingdoms broke away from imperial control. The powerful Maratha Confederacy, Sikh states, and other local powers challenged Mughal dominance. The arrival of the British East India Company turned trade footholds into territorial control. The decisive moment came in 1857 with the Indian Rebellion, after which Britain dissolved the Mughal court entirely and placed India under direct crown rule. The colonial era. From the late 18th to the early 20th centuries, European colonial powers took direct control over much of the Muslim world. Britain controlled India, Egypt, Sudan, Malaya, and large parts of the Persian Gulf. France occupied Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Lebanon, and Syria. The Netherlands dominated Indonesia. Italy colonized Libya and parts of the Horn of Africa. Russia expanded into Central Asia and the Caucasus. Colonial rule brought railways, telegraphs, and new administrative systems, but also economic exploitation, suppression of local governance, and cultural disruption. Islamic law and education were often sidelined in favor of European legal codes and school systems. Islamic reform movements. Faced with military defeat and political subjugation, Muslim intellectuals and leaders began to debate how to respond. Some called for reform and modernization, others for returning to the fundamentals of Islam, and many sought a synthesis of the two. Notable trends included Pan-Islamism, advocating unity among Muslims worldwide, led by figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani. Salafism, emphasizing a return to the practices of the earliest Muslim generations. Modernist Islam, promoting education, science, and constitutional governance within an Islamic framework. Sufi revivals, strengthening spiritual practices to resist cultural assimilation. The fall of the Ottoman Caliphate. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, devastated the Ottoman Empire, which sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary. British and French forces, supported by Arab revolts, dismantled Ottoman control over the Arab world. In 1924, the newly established Republic of Turkey under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk formally abolished the Caliphate, ending an institution that had symbolized Muslim unity for centuries. The former Ottoman lands were carved into new nation-states, often with borders drawn by European powers, creating political realities that still shape the modern Middle East. Independence movements and the post-colonial era. The mid-20th century saw a wave of independence across the Muslim world. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947, leading to the creation of a Muslim-majority Pakistan. Indonesia declared independence from the Netherlands in 1945. Algeria, after a brutal war, won freedom from France in 1962. Dozens of African and Middle Eastern nations emerged from colonial rule between the 1940s and 1970s. These newly independent states faced enormous challenges, building modern economies, unifying diverse populations, and navigating Cold War politics. Islam in the contemporary world. Today, Islam is a truly global religion with over 1.9 billion adherents, spread across every continent. Diversity of Muslim societies. Middle East and North Africa, rich in historical heritage, but facing political instability, conflicts, and reform movements. South Asia, home to the largest Muslim population in the world, with vibrant traditions in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei showcase unique blends of Islamic and local cultural practices. Africa, Islam thrives from Morocco to Nigeria to Somalia, with deep connections to trade, scholarship, and Sufi orders. Western nations, Muslim communities in Europe, the Americas, and Australia contribute to diverse multicultural societies. Challenges and opportunities. Modern Muslim societies grapple with political instability in certain regions, economic inequality and development challenges, globalization and the spread of both Western culture and Islamic revivalist movements, interfaith relations in an interconnected world. At the same time, there are signs of renewal. Islamic finance and charitable systems are expanding. Educational initiatives link tradition with modern science. Muslim voices in art, literature, and politics are shaping global conversations. The global Ummah. The concept of the Ummah, the worldwide community of Muslims, remains a powerful ideal. Modern communications and travel connect Muslims across continents in ways unimaginable in earlier centuries. From annual gatherings during the Hajj in Mecca to online exchanges of scholarship and activism, Islam today is a living, evolving force in the world. The story of Islam is not just a history of past empires and rulers, it is a continuing narrative of faith, culture, and identity that bridges ancient traditions with modern realities. Thank you for tuning into Background Historian tonight. If you feel you would like to see a certain topic covered on a future episode, please feel free to leave a comment and I will cover it. Last but not least, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these daily videos and want to be reminded of future uploads. Without further ado, good night, sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow.